aware are drawn from different parts of the world. And then we shall have the main presentations clustered in two, which will be broken by a brief panel discussion moderated by myself. And then we shall have the last session of our presenters, again, capped with reflections and question and answer. So I think as we allow our friends a few minutes to join, let me invite the chair of the department again to see if she has any comments that she would want to make. Dr. Mushiri.
Thank you, Dr. Siondu. Thank you very much. Thank you for telling us about how we are going to run the program this afternoon. There's somebody whose mic is on. I don't know, Frida, would you take care of that? Frida? Actually, I think it's Frida's mic. Frida? Frida? Oh my. Frida, if you can hear us, your mic is on.
I think I've muted her.
All right, thank you.
Me to mute my mic.
Yes, that's Frida. Yes, that's okay now. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Siondu, and for having invited me to speak. We have our Dean, Faculty of Arts, Professor Ephraim Wahome with us. We have guest speakers, colleagues, we have our students, and everyone else that is present. Good afternoon. Now, I'm delighted and honored to welcome you to the Department of Literature at the University of Nairobi this afternoon as we engage on this subject of Kenyan literature. Thank you very much for joining us from wherever that you are. And on behalf of the Department of Literature, we are very grateful that you've chosen to join us for a conversation on Kenyan literature as part of the celebrations of the 50th anniversary of the University of Nairobi. And I would like also to appreciate the presenters, our speakers this afternoon, for taking your time to provoke us on this subject, on different topics on Kenyan literature or literature in general. Over the past 50 years, which is what we are celebrating this year, the Department of Literature at the University of Nairobi has been a key member of the Faculty of Arts and has always been at the core of Kenya's academic, cultural, political, economic, and even spiritual life and well-being. Well, we may have had our shortcomings, but those are expected as a part of any institution or family as such as ours. And scholars, as you know, they are not immune to making mistakes, but we are constantly aware that we need to keep the spirit of scholarship burning, the spirit of literary scholarship specifically burning. And today, therefore, we choose to celebrate our very many achievements. The department has contributed significantly to the training of teachers, journalists, writers, thespians, editors, and others in various disciplines and fields beyond literature. And we are aware as a department of our responsibility. We are aware of our responsibility to promote literary production and scholarship, a task that we have pursued diligently as the mother department of literature in Kenya. Our roots are spread wide, nationally, regionally, and internationally, and our graduates work and live all over the world. And I'm actually very glad to see many of them here today among the speakers and among the participants this afternoon. So today's conversation, as Mwalimu Siondu told us as we started, is about reminding ourselves about and reflecting on the place of literature in the life of Kenya and Kenyans. And this conversation is part of the discourse on our Kenyanness, our idea of being, which the department has been engaging with for the past 50 years. So without taking too much time, I welcome you to this conversation and I wish you very fruitful discussions. And now it's my pleasure to welcome the Dean, Faculty of Arts, Professor Ephraim Wahome, to officially open the webinar. Professor Wahome, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mochiri. Thank you for the very good introduction. And I want to say from the offset that I do welcome participants to literature, the Department of Literature, and the Faculty of Arts. The two have been intertwined through time, such that whatever has been happening in the faculty is what sometimes have been initiated in literature and vice versa. I want to mention that this is a department that has a lot of potential, has been growing over the years, and it has been consistent. It is one of the few departments that has remained stable, strong, and maintained growth. I also want to thank the individuals who are presenting today from different parts of the world, that you are able to come together and celebrate Kenyan literature for the 50 years. I think this is a wonderful moment, and we do treasure it as a faculty and by extension as scholars within the University of Nairobi. The Department of Literature was part of a very heated debate in 1980s, late 70s, early 80s, and on to about the second liberation. And we have seen quite significant contribution from the department. We appreciate the roles that have been played by many scholars within that particular department. We have seen the work of Michere Mugo, who is one of the presenters. We have seen the works of Guge Wathiongo, and we have seen all the luminaries and also budding scholars who have been very key in moving the department forward, and also moving the whole area of literature, including, I've seen a very recent inclusion, which is puppetry theater. And these are areas that are unique, and the department has its own unique area within the University of Nairobi, which is highly appreciated by everyone. I want to say that the Department of Literature has been quite vibrant in terms of producing new scholars and also producing new programs, very attractive programs. We have seen the film program that has been very attractive. I've met scholars in that particular area in countries like Germany who are studying film. And I'm very happy that literature has initiated some of those incentives. The Department of Literature has been in the core in the liberation of the disciplines of the University of Nairobi, to the extent that without disciplines that are committed and individuals within those disciplines who are willing to sacrifice, I don't think we would have gotten the second liberation. And this particular department has been in the forefront. I would also like to appreciate the department for the liberation of the content or of the academic content of the University of Nairobi. I think there is a process that has been quite fruitful, and we have successfully come to an age where we are thinking of African literature. We have come to an age where we are talking of oral traditions, which I was taught when I was in the Department of Literature, and many other areas of literature that have grown to become key contributions towards the reconstruction of our history and our literatures. I wish to state that the process has been a reflection also of the country's, the dynamic processes of national politics, that the events that we have seen in the department have been a reflection of the national politics. And as a result, there has been more tendency towards the liberation of particular fields because of participation of scholars from this department and others. I want to particularly mention that in the 80s, there were literally no boundaries. So you'd find a historian and a literary critic and everybody else participating in a public debate. You would find students moving from one sector to the other. That kind of fluidity We have attempted to maintain it, but it has been elusive, probably because there was that core goal of liberating the country from what we call new colonialism, and also from the pangs of colonialism, which came into the 80s and 70s, particularly through scholarships and colonization of the mind. The Department of Literature, together with others, played a significant role in making this country what it is today. I would say that by 1990, the department plus all the others had reached a threshold where the country was to be transformed. And it did transform from a dictatorship to, through multi-party politics, into a more liberal society. Of course, we still have fights to continue with, particularly in the area of our tribal politics, our nepotism, and many other evils that are associated with our society today. So the department has kept the fight, and some of the virtues that it has fought for, like academic freedom, democratic leadership, has been part of what we are enjoying today. I wish to particularly mention one of the speakers, Professor Michere Mugo, who was a dean in 1980s, actually 1980 to 1982. And I would say that part of what we have in the faculty is a continuation of what the luminaries like Michere Mugo actually built. So we see ourselves as an extension of what you did in those days. I also want to mention that there are many others. I don't want to mention each one of them, but I want to assure you that, as you can see from the array of scholars who are participating today, or scholars within the Faculty of Arts, we have continued the fight, and we are continuing developing that scholarship environment that you left in this particular faculty. And for those who are in the diaspora, I think we do appreciate that you are able to, you have been participating in our activity. I want to say that the faculty has remained the melting pot of ideas, which have shaped the country at large. The level of contribution may be debated, but the fact that we have continued checking on the excesses is the most important contribution to the development of Kenya as a nation that is independent. I wish to thank you all. I was supposed to introduce our speaker, Professor Ogengo, but because of a Senate that is taking place now, I'll take that particular role and declare this meeting open. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ephraim Wahome. For our guests abroad and around, Professor Wahome is a professor of archaeology at the University of Nairobi and is currently serving as a dean in the Faculty of Arts. Professor, we thank you so much for your continued support for the Department of Literature and for the enterprise of scholarship generally. Now, at this point, I would like us now to proceed to the next stage of our webinar, which essentially entails listening to our first speaker. The first speaker is Professor Henry Ndangasi, and his title for the presentation today is The Department of Literature at 50, Facts and the Fabrications. A brief note on Professor Ndangasi is that Professor has been a member of this department for 50 years. He came to the university in 1970 as an undergraduate student, went out to the United States at the University of California in Santa Cruz for his PhD, and then came back to the same department as a member of academic staff, where he has served over the years to the point that we are at. And so I would say that if there's anyone who is best placed to know what has happened and what has not happened at the University of Nairobi's Department of Literature, it is our own Professor Henry Ndangasi. Now, with your indulgence, I want to invite Professor Ndangasi to speak to us briefly for the coming 15 minutes. And then we can have a session later on to discuss any matters that may have arisen from his presentation. As I said at the beginning of our session, our protocol again is that I appeal to everyone who will not be speaking to switch off their mic so that we can allow Professor Ndangasi the moment to have their presentation. Professor Ndangasi, wherever you are, feel welcome to officially make your presentation on this occasion. Thank you. Professor Ndangasi?
His mic is off. Professor, okay, your mic is off.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
We can. Yes, we can.
Okay. Asking me to do a presentation on the Department of Literature, having been associated with it for the entire 50 years, is like asking me to write a book. But I'll try to stick to the time that has been allocated to me. And as you've been told, the title of my presentation is The Department of Literature at 50, the Facts and the Fabrications. And I'll begin with a story. In 1995, Carol Sicherman, the American scholar and author of the book on Ngugi wa Thiong'o called The Making of a Rebel, came to the University of Nairobi. Sicherman had applied for and been given a grant by her university to sort out a research problem concerning Ngugi. Ngugi wa Thiong'o published this letter, which he co-authored with Taban Loliong and Anyumba, Wall Anyumba, requesting the University of Nairobi to abolish the English department and replace it with the Department of Literature. She told me when she came to the department. I was the chair at the time, but he did not publish the reply from the relevant authorities, she added. I came via the UK and spoke to the professors who were here then, but they all advised me to come and check with the guinea pigs. They told me you are one of them, she said. And as I recollect, when she uttered the words guinea pigs, she had an ironic smile on her face. So my research agenda is find out if there was a reply to the famous letter, and of course, the contents of the response. I figured we would have to go back to the Senate documents of the late 1960s. According to our statutes, Senate is the organ that discusses and approves academic programs and the creation of new departments. But then I wasn't sure whether or not there were any ethical issues concerning an outsider who wanted to dig into our official archives. So I called Professor Francis Gishaga, the then Vice Chancellor, to inquire about the issue. Our Senate minutes are public documents. We have nothing to hide, and your friend should feel free to look at them, Gishaga told me. American researchers consider it unethical to pay informants. So when I offered to assist in reading through those dusty old minutes, I knew I was going to work for free. We searched and searched and searched, and in the end, we found nothing. The legendary letter never reached the Senate and was therefore never discussed. And come to think of it, if the university administration had reacted to the letter and accordingly informed the authors, Ngugi would have published the reply. After all, he did that with the back and forth correspondence between him and the institution upon his release from detention. That was when he was asking to have his job back. But as I was flipping through the records, I stumbled on a letter from the then chair of the department about Ngugi's application for a teaching job. The letter was dated 1968, and in it, the chair was requesting the British Council to assist in the evaluation of this application. The council suggested the name of Professor Killam as an assessor, and Killam was a specialist on African literature who was teaching at the time, who was teaching in Canada. Killam recommended Ngugi for the job, and the novelist was eventually hired as a special lecturer. The issue was that Ngugi had apparently been sponsored by the British Council to pursue a master's degree at the University of Leeds, but he had come back without this qualification. And according to a research even Munge did for his doctorate, Ngugi's master's thesis had been rejected. Owol Anyumba appeared to have suffered a similar fate. His CV said he had obtained a master's degree from Cambridge University. But he didn't collect the certificate. I personally doubted this claim. Why wouldn't you even take a loan to fly to the UK to pick up such an important document? Besides, what prevented Cambridge University from mailing the certificate to their students? I submitted my own PhD dissertation to UC Santa Cruz in 1979, and they mailed the certificate to me in 1980. I showed it to Mr. Anyumba, who was my boss at the time. Taban Loliong had graduated with an MA in creative writing from the University of Iowa in the US. He was therefore not in mainstream literary scholarship. The point I want to make is that these three gentlemen must have been considered marginally qualified to teach in the university. Two were BA holders, and the third had an MA in creative writing. Besides, in 1968, they were newly employed. Their desire to overhaul an academic curriculum must have appeared presumptuous and impertinent to the authorities of the time. I know about the cult of personality that has been created around Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I also know that myths are more colorful than the naked truth. But let us, for a moment, do some critical thinking. In an institution with many PhD holders, these three gentlemen must have wrestled with identity issues. So we ask, what was the motivation behind their literary activism? Was it a genuine and sincere desire to reform a curriculum, or was it a compensatory and self-serving effort to stake a claim in the academic cosmos? They sought to Can you hear me?
Yes, Professor, we can.
Okay. They sought to abolish,
we can hear you.
Yeah, they sought to abolish the English department and replace it with the Department of Literature. But given that English had long before become a world language, the idea of teaching literature in English and English translation rather than English literature had already been institutionalized. For my Cambridge school certificate in 1967, one of my set books was Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. As for my Cambridge higher school certificate in 1969, three of the set books were outside the realm of English literature. Bertolt Brecht's Galileo, Lenry Peters's The Second Round, and Kamara Lyer's The Radiance of the King. Brecht's play was a translation from German. Lyer's novel was translated from French. So weren't these three gentlemen fighting a battle that had already been won? In 1968, the Ministry of Education, headed by Dr. Julius Bikonyo Kiano, had already started implementing the policy of Africanization. If you read the newspapers of the time, you will find that Kiano's detractors called the policy Kikuyunization. Be that as it may, the ministry Africanized teaching positions in high schools, including headships. And by the early 1970s, this policy had reached the University of Nairobi. By 1973, the year I graduated, nearly all our British lecturers had gone back to their country. Again, we ask the question, given that Africanization was the official policy of the Kenya government, and contrary to the tone of the letter in question, weren't these authors simply swimming with the current rather than against it, if you excuse the cliche? Weren't they not cashing in on a policy that favored them? The department I joined in 1970 was not called the English department. It was called the Department of Literature. Most of the lecturers were Wazungu, with Professor Andrew Gar as the chair. Taban Loliong had joined the department, having transferred from the Institute of African Studies. And although we had courses such as the African novel, modern African poetry, and oral literature, the majority of the offerings for single majors belonged to European or world literature. The classic novel, classic poetry, development of drama, theory of literature and stylistics, and Shakespeare and Tolstoy and their contemporaries. The previous year, Ngugi had resigned, reportedly over the issue of academic freedom, the refusal of the university to allow opposition leader Oginga Odinga to deliver a public lecture at the institution. But he came back in 1972 when I was doing my third year. As we saw it then, two related departments had been established. The Department of Literature with a mandate to teach literature in three languages, English, French, and Kiswahili, and the Department of Linguistics and African Languages. The sub-department of French was housed under the Department of Literature, but literature in Kiswahili never took off. And this program was eventually appropriated by the Department of Linguistics and African Languages. Maybe the English department had been quietly abolished, but there is no evidence that this was in response to the letter that was written by Ngugi, Taban, and Anyumba. In 1973, the year I graduated, the Wazungu were leaving. Ngugi wa Thiong'o took over from Andrew Gar, but this transition happened after I had left. The change in the curriculum that many scholars so glibly talk about was the result of the conference on the teaching of literature that was held at Nairobi School in 1974. That was the same year I went to America on an exchange program called the University of California Education Abroad Program. But I was told that in his new role as the chair of the department, Ngugi was the organizer of this event. On the positive side, this conference affirmed the educational principle of moving from the known to the unknown. African literature was accorded a central place in the syllabus. But from the point of view of literature as an institution, the results of this meeting were calamitous. The age-old idea that good literature speaks to our common humanity went out the window. Instead, literary works were to be taught from the perspective of how they related to Africa and Africans. So we had concentric circles: African literature, literature of the African diaspora, literature of the rest of the world. The fact that Shakespeare's Hamlet, Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, or Murasaki's Tale of Genji tell the human story and resonate with the entire species of Homo sapiens was of no consequence to the participants. Black aesthetics was introduced as a core course. In the course description, no attempt was made to define the concept of aesthetics. Instead, the focus was on the suffering of Black people and the struggle against the institutions of slavery and colonialism. And I don't know whether those who designed the course thought there was brown aesthetics, yellow aesthetics, and white aesthetics. Whatever the case, the notion of the universal in literature was roundly rejected. The discipline became the face of African nationalism. I think I'll stop there. My time is up, I think. I have a longer paper, but I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Professor Indengati, for your presentation on the facts and fabrications of, around the Department of Literature. I think we'll have occasion to share experiences at the end of the session. At this point, I wish to invite our second speaker, who we also implore to keep time to allow more detailed discussion at the end of it all. Our second speaker is Professor Peter Muker, who is currently a professor of literature at Moi University. He was a student at the University of Nairobi some time back, and like Professor Indengati, he also went to the University of California, although Amuka went to Los Angeles when Indengati went to Santa Cruz. And since his graduation with a PhD, Professor Amuka has been plying his trade in Eastern Africa generally, and more University. The topic for Professor Amuka.
Are you getting me?
Okay, Prof. To have a bit of a challenge with the technology, but I was saying that Professor Amuka's presentation is on the search for an appropriate word towards theory and method of expressing Kenya in literature. Professor Amuka, you are welcome to make your presentation.
Quite slow, but plenty.
Professor Amuka, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Please, it's time for your presentation, Prof.
I can hear you. You haven't let unmuted. It means
They're supposed to hear you, but now because of
please go to the next speaker, then I come. We are having problem connection. Connection problems. Speaker, I'll come third.
Okay, Prof. Thank you very much for that. It shall be well. We hope it shall be well. Our third speaker, who we're requesting now to come in second, is Professor Evan Munge, name has been mentioned by Professor Indengati in Indengati's presentation a few minutes ago. Professor Munge Evan is based at the Northwestern University in the US and has an affiliation with Stellenbosch University in South Africa. And his presentation is on unsettling the universal norm, a re-engagement with Ngugi's literature and society. Professor Evan Munge, you are welcome to present. Is Professor Munge around?
Yes, he is. He is. Mwalimu Mwangi, your mic is off.
I saw him around.
He is around. He is around.
Okay.
Yeah, hello. I think now I had been muted by the host, but I think now you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, Prof, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. This is a great pleasure to be here to celebrate with you the 50 years of the literature department. I want to reread Goge's Literature and Society, and not really the essay because everyone has read it, but allow me to share. Would you allow me to share some slides?
By all means, Prof.
But the system is not allowing me to do that. And I'll just go ahead and talk about a few things that I had. Sorry. Unsettling the Universal Man. I'm just trying to read Goge's essay, which I think is foundational in explaining the kind of work that we do in the Department of Literature, which I still consider my home department. I went to the department in the 1990s. I did my bachelor's in literature, the master's, and PhD. My PhD is from the department where I studied Goge's work, and in comparison with work by Grace Ogot. In reading this essay, I'm trying to. I'm going to use the work by Sylvia Winter and about the universal man. And she says that the struggle of a new millennium will be one between the ongoing imperatives of securing the well-being of our present ethnic class, that is the Western bourgeoisie, conception of the human man, which overrepresents itself as if it were the human itself, and that of securing the well-being and therefore the full cognitive and behavioral autonomy of the human species itself, ourselves. And this explains, what Professor Indagazi was talking about, the interest in the particularity and the opposition to the notions of the universal that Goge talks about in the essay. I'm also using the University of Nairobi strategic plan, which explains that, highlights the need for freedom of expression, innovativeness and creativity, professionalism, social responsibility, respect for and conservation of the environment. So as I read Goge's work and what we do in the literature department, it is within that framework. Goge has revised the essay. I had a screenshot showing you the things that he has done that are different from the 1975 version of the essay. He changes it in 1997, where he places greater emphasis on gender, that gender is important when we read African literature. He insists on the importance of orature. He de-emphasizes the view that family planning is Western bourgeois practice. In the earlier essay, he had made fun of the westernized modern Kenyan's post-colonial bourgeoisie for trying to plan human beings. He deletes that part and replaces it with contempt for African languages, that the bourgeoisie, the new leaders in Africa tend to have a very low opinion of of African languages. And he acknowledges the importance of unofficial literature as part of the national culture. He also talks about the Black diaspora and insists that, that critics should re-examine our own assumptions and prejudices when we do our literary criticism. And that, that's a point that features in both versions of the essay. And it's good to read Ngugi's essays, just the way we read the novels. He de-emphasizes the importance of form. It's as if literature to him is expressions of ideas. He doesn't dismiss form completely, but the way he says it, the subtext is that form is not as important as content. But I think when we read the essays, we should read them as closely as we read a poem. And I look at some sentences that he has changed. For example, he says, literature comes from conscious act of men in society in the early essay, 1974 essay, and he changes that to include gender. Literature results from conscious act of men and women in society. And I'm glad in the literature department, gender was emphasized throughout, especially through the work of Professor Wanjiko Mukavi Kafira. And, almost all my professors emphasized the need to consider gender issues in our literary analysis. Of course, in Ngugi's work, there are a lot of blind spots. And by saying this, I'm not necessarily dismissing him. I'm just trying to show how some of these assumptions are so deeply ingrained in us that sometimes we have to be vigilant all the time, because even if he says that gender is important, we need to consider to incorporate, to include women in our analysis of literature. His own essay does not cite any literary work by a woman and does not cite any woman theoretician. In fact, the next sentence after he says that, in the next one of the sentences he changes, a writer comes from a particular class and race and nation. He changes that to say a writer comes from a particular class, gender, race, and nation. But the next sentence starts with he. So the writer again becomes male, which shows that blind spot that I'm talking about, which we always need to be careful about. When I, following my lecturers and my mentors at the University of Nairobi, whenever I receive a student's work, an essay, I demand that at least a third of the references in the bibliography should be by women scholars. But Ngugi throughout his essay does not include any of those. And even when he writes the book, in the name of the mother, where he talks about gender, I think the only text that he discusses is the Garemga's the nervous condition, and he does that after discussing all the other writers that he discusses are male. I also noticed in the essay the tendency to emphasize the human, as if nature serves the interests of the human, which Sylvia Winter, argues against, that we should consider the environment, we should consider other species. We are not necessarily the pinnacle of creation. And Winter, who fascinates me. I did not read her at the University of Nairobi, although she is present. There is that book called Gabika in the departmental library, in which there is an essay by Sylvia Winter. She's Caribbean, born 1928, but she's not as well known as her male counterparts, because again, the academy is very patriarchal. So even when we read Caribbean literature, it is usually the male writers. I was introduced to Caribbean literature by Joshua Taiye, who did a very good job in introducing us, immersing us into the diasporic, the Black diasporic literature. But again, the canon was male. Derek Walcott, George Lamming, Trevor Lone. It is when I did my master's with Professor Wajiko Mukari Kabira that we started dealing with women artists. So Sylvia Winters is still new to me, but she has been used by other scholars such as Wehelia and our own Tavaya Nyong'o to study diasporic and queer African-American literature. So we have done a very good job, especially with gender, the representation of gender, the incorporation of African languages in the curriculum. But I want to suggest that we need to adjust. I had said that beyond the present agenda for literature departments in the next 50 years, but I don't think I would be able to cover 50 years. I would just say 5 years, the things that we need to do in the next 5 years, probably even 2 years, because this is quite simple. We need, I think, to incorporate digital humanities, digitize especially oral literature, where we are very, very, very strong. The department has, as Dr. Moshiri mentioned, the department has been very influential, not only in Africa, but globally. Actually, I think Cornell's Department of English has changed its name following the footsteps of the University of Nairobi. It has changed its name from the Department of English to Department of Literatures. The same thing with Rutgers University. So we have been the trendsetters globally. And digital humanities is one of those areas that we need to emphasize quite a lot. I have students that are working on digital poetry, the use of WhatsApp, the use of Facebook, the use of YouTube to disseminate African literature. There are also dangers in that, because digital humanities has been established in Western institutions. We might fall into the trap of imitating or just reproducing that which has been done in Western institutions. So as we digitize these literatures, as we discuss them from a digital perspective, we need to pay attention to how that digital transmission and production is situated. And Munge emphasizes a lot about the need to have a situated universalism, not just the abstract universalism where we just see the literature as expressing what Professor Idagasi calls the common humanity. Remember, the African is not considered a human being. Actually, in this forum, probably only I don't think probably no one of here would be considered human, because the human, according to the West, is male, white, Christian, heterosexual, wealthy, and also able-bodied. So people with disabilities would not be considered part of that common humanity. So Munge insists that we need to consider those other, and Sylvia Winter too, we need to consider those other forms of expression that this genre of man has excluded. I had a picture of that person, that genre of the human that has been influential since the 15th century up to the 20th century. So that when we talk about man, we are suggesting that it is that white, able-bodied person. I would also, and I think we have done this way. Is my time up? I had time to myself, but I lost track of time. So let me just talk, mention a few things that we need to do: eco-criticism and ecofeminism. For example, in Ole Kuleti's Vanishing Hearts and Clara Mumanyi's Nakuruto, so that we are not just focusing on the human-centric, the anthropocentric representations of the African, in African literature, but also those non-human others that are part of our universe. I would also suggest that we read more texts in African languages, including Swahili literature. We should not leave Swahili literature to the Swahili department. Remember, most people in Swahili department are linguists. They're trained in linguistics, the language, not literature, but we seem to have burdened them with the study of Swahili. So it is in the literature department that we should be doing Luo literature, Kikuyu literature, not just literatures in English. So I'm also suggesting that we do animal studies, and we should not see animal studies as a Western thing. It's not the Muzungus that taught Maasai how to keep cattle. You know, we have always been involved with the animals. Probably disability studies. Our literature is, especially because of the Mau Mau War, and even that literature that is not about the Mau Mau, like Grace Ogot's Promised Lad, you know, they're about disabilities, because, you know, they're trying to unsettle that universal man who is able-bodied. We include those other people that, you know, I think Goge uses Ado Agima. So we move away from those Ado Agima, the complete man, the complete human, to even those other people that have or what we consider to be disabilities. One thing that I'm curious about, and Professor Idagas maybe had that in his paper about the fabrications. I don't know whether there is a fabrication amongst our students that we are a bunch of homophobes, that they cannot study queer literature in the literature department because these professors are homophobes. Who is a homophobe in the literature department, that we do not engage with queerness in works by Okwiri Oduor, like My Father's Head, Rebecca Jow's Ripples in the Pool, Clifton Gashagua's Madman at Cliffy, and also the art by Jim Chuchu and Wangechi Mutu. I had one of the images of Wangechi Mutu's that captures that that identity very well, so that people have to go to South Africa to do queer studies in Kenya, while the students in Kenya that want to do queerness have to study South African literature. And I think we, probably it's because there's a myth that one cannot do queer theory in at the University of Nairobi. I wrote one of my papers for Professor Idangasi on deconstruction, and I included the representation of same-sex desire in Mwangi Gesheros, Across the Bridge, and the mixers. And I think I got an A. So it's a myth that we cannot do queer theory at the University of Nairobi. I had also shown that Goge is starting to green language in his writing, but he mentions that we need to work against the biases. And I meant, you know, I'll just list them, the ones that I had, which we need to be careful about. I've mentioned that even when one tries to argue against these biases, sometimes they creep in. Goge is arguing against gender discrimination, but his work does those things that he argues against. We need to work against racism and anti-Blackness. We need to work against homophobia. We need to work against ageism. Like when I mentioned to some, I think somebody saw that I'm presenting on Goge, and he asked, why are you presenting on an old writer? Why? The fact that he's old does not mean that he should be gotten rid of. He's important. Dismiss Goge not because he's old, but dismiss him because he has other things, not on the basis of age. I've also been very careful about adultism, systematic discrimination of people on the basis of their youth. The fact that one is a young person does not mean that they do not have any ideas to give us. Ableism as well, so disabilities, you know, discriminating against people with disabilities, and ethnocentrism. This is one of the departments that is very, very conscious about inclusivity. There are other webinars, you know, which I've seen are going on, but they're all by men. You know, all the presenters are men, but here at least we have representation by women scholars. But look at the order of things: men first, women later. So we need to be extremely careful against those biases that are so much part of our life. And I'm really looking forward to the other presentations where we have that diversity of voices. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer questions at the end and receive any feedback that you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mwangi, for your presentation. And as we have observed, I think Professor has been very gracious in terms of being time conscious. We hope that our other speakers will extend us the same courtesy so we can have a conversation at the end of it all. Now, we had agreed with Professor Muker that he would speak next. I don't know if he's now well placed to speak, or do we move on to the last person, the last speaker for the day, and then allow Professor Muker a chance to speak a little later. Professor, are you good to go? Professor Muker?
Professor Muker's mic is off. Professor Muker.
He is trying to get in through Lily Salat.
Yes.
Yeah, Lily, is your mic on? Maybe what we could do in the interest of time is, yes, Prof, you are welcome to speak to us. Professor Amuka? I thought I saw him just now.
What's his name? What's his name? I'm not
Amuka, Peter
even
Amuka.
seeing.
He's going, he's coming.
His name.
Lily Salat credentials, eh?
Oh, like Lily Salat.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Lily. No, I'm not seeing Lily.
But I've seen Prof. Prof.
Okay, can I speak?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah, let me make my presentation quickly by being very historical. Sometimes in the early 80s, I went to the University of California, Los Angeles as a student. 2 semesters into my stay there, I was invited by somebody called James Coleman. I never met him before, political scientist and also a historian, and he invited me to lunch. He knew I was going to UCLA, as the University of California, Los Angeles is known. He invited me to a weekday lunch and talked about the Department of Literature. When I was invited to address you or to participate in this discussion, I remember that encounter with James Coleman at the African Studies Center, which now is named in his memory. What he talked about was surprising because he simply said that that department of yours is now tamed. He used the word tamed, and then for me, I remember thinking of the word lamed. And he told me now there's peace because the university has been relieved of firebrands. I think what struck me was that this was an American professor commenting on a department that he didn't have any connections with, but he knew about. And then he told me he knew I would enjoy myself at UCLA. But what struck me and what I think about it all is that the department was known beyond the boundaries of Kenya. It was known as far as James Coleman was concerned for subversive activities, as he called them. I didn't say much. I was scared. I'd just been to America, you know, I didn't know what to do. But now that we're speaking here, I think I remember, I just recall a few things about the power of the department, the fact that it was known beyond its boundaries, even within the university, beyond the discipline. Because I was reminded now of one of my undergraduate history tutors who questioned me many times in my first year against choosing the wrong discipline in my second year of study at the University of Nairobi. The discipline that he thought was wrong was literature. I won't name him, but according to him, it ought to have remained the Department of English until such time that the medium of instruction was one for all the Kenyan languages and the curricular content was predominantly Kenyan and African in a global context. He didn't like the name literature. He didn't like what was said, what was stated in the new curriculum. I think I want to confess that when I was there as an undergraduate in the early 70s, we were involved in so many things that the department was doing to really Africanize the curriculum. I know that this went on until sometime much later that the university or the department undertook to
Have we lost you, Prof? Professor Muker, are you still with us?
and Professor Andrew Ga. And what is stressed was that all literatures were equal in value. I talked about universal values, universalism, and so on. And he told us that there was nothing unique to any literature that one could say was more universal than the others. That was my reading, and that is in my yellow notes. He cited some African writers, Achebe included, and Ngugi. At that time, Ngugi was actually seated in Lecture Theatre 2, and many other lecturers in the department. I was told that was the practice, that when the full professor is introducing first years, all the lecturers were there. I think was the only one and he told us we'll be Afrocentric, but we'll still meet D.H. Lawrence and others. I think what I remember after Andrew Ga had been head of department for a year was that Ngugi wa Thiong'o took over. And he was a kind of magnet because he attracted many African high school with literature and a few things here from Greece and elsewhere. I was happy to have the chance to meet many African writers, and Ngugi invited many of them, or if they were passing through Nairobi to some other meetings, they would call on us. So at this many occasions to meet the likes of Achebe, I think Aikwe Ama, and even in my second year, I think we went beyond to the diaspora because the curriculum emphasized that we should not just confine ourselves to Africa for 1 month and a half. They were very nasty about V.S. Naipaul, whom we didn't like, and called his prose or satire something very nasty that I don't want to say here. At the same time, of course, we had Michelle Mugo, who also had so many connections with African writers, and they visited her and really felt African. I think the Department of Literature can say at that time and at that time really did a lot to Africanize our orientation to literature, because before then, I think I had a lot of Shakespeare in my head, and I still do, but I didn't regret Ngugi's presence as being the kind of magnet that attracted so many African writers and made me feel proud to be an African. But more than that, I was also proud that we were associated with Kenya's foremost novelist. I must confess that when he was detained and then left to Kenya, I sorely missed him. I also remember during that time that oral literature was alive in Okot Pabitek. His lectures were danced and sung. I can't tell you I can't show you the notes because most of the time you forgot about taking notes and just listening and seeing what was happening on stage. Drama and laughter dominated our classes in the second year. He accused those who yapped about a literary desert in East Africa of literary deafness. He insisted that literature was intended for enjoyment as a cultural artifact. It belonged to all, not just the literati who were studying for degrees. From doctors who dressed in butchers' white overalls to architects who designed toilets next to dining rooms, he addressed society rather than the discipline. I think the contrast was that Ngugi was more concerned in this literature explaining society, but also influencing society. Ngugi was concerned about this discipline in such a manner that after some public lectures, Okot would tease him and call him Mr. Smith and so many things, because he was doing what Okot said should not be done with literature or African literature in particular. So the classes that we had with the court were classes full of joy, full of drama. At the end of it all, I could understand why Okot decided to name his poem songs, which in his mother tongue was Wer. And I also understood why he thought the definitions of genres that we had from our colonial and post-colonial experience then were really not reflecting what African literature was or what the genres were. When later on, the Ugura Nyumba took our class to Nzawi location for fieldwork in Cumberland, a lady sang us a story. We asked many questions, but we learned that the differences between prose and poetry were only there in our English literature classes or courses, but that most of African genres did not have those differences or those, did not have prose as something distinct from poetry. So generic naming Anyumba emphasized in African art is unique to it and should not be mixed up with what we had learned in other literatures. I think what we learned then as the department, the curriculum got Africanized was simply that if we wanted to understand our literatures, we had to go back to the village, go back to our languages and find the definitions that were inbuilt in our literatures. Anyumba told us, for example, that it would be very beneficial for somebody studying Gikuyu literature, oral literature, to find out if there is any word or there's any way you can define literature in Gikuyu, other than define literature from the perspective of the English or British. He talked about indigenous cultural terms and definitions, and this followed me all the way to my master's project, in which he insisted I must find explanations in the mother tongue and then explain them in English, but not start, say, for example, defining a riddle, but defining it from the perspective of the English. In other words, we're doing literature, but also doing some cultural study. Taught me that English, for example, English literature was rooted in the culture, just like our oral dictionaries also had definitions for our literatures. Much later on, Okoth Okombo published an essay where he said, in order for us to know even the theory of how to study African literature, we have to go to our cultures and look for those definitions in our original languages. According to him, therefore, the method, the theory, and everything is in the text that we call oral literature. We should not do this according to Anyumba through another language. And I think this is what Ngugi has tried to do. Ngugi can write in English very well. He taught me very many courses. But I think what he has done lately is to really prove what he told me when I wanted to do a thesis on Leo Tolstoy. He told me that Leo Tolstoy was too far removed from Kenya, the Kenyan reality, that I could study if I wanted to. I'd written in my paper for my master's, try to understand the society. It's to do something in oral literature, whichever group you want to go to. I decided to do that, and I think I would like to insist
Are we having challenges with technology, Prof? Are you still there? Am I the only one not following Prof? Or
No,
is there-
Professor.
We see we have lost him.
No problem.
Let me
He's
see if
back. I see him back.
Okay.
Okay. I want to conclude. I don't want to say too much, but I think I just want to observe that in our country, own country, Kenya, I treat a neighboring language, and we have over 40 of them, as foreign. I don't want to know what my neighbor is speaking. I must go through English. I wish it were possible to learn my neighbor's language and communicate with him. I think we understand that when Ngugi wins a prize and addresses us in Gikuyu, we deliberately ignore translations and complain, even as we read translated poetry by Pablo Neruda and also translated, fiction by Leo Tolstoy and even Dostoevsky. I think we are deaf to our art and cultures and literature. We don't have our own local word to describe ourselves and our literature. I think we are still stuck in that colonial, in that colonial web, where we must go back and do things in English. I have nothing against English, but I think there's nothing wrong in our doing what Ngugi did, addressing the world in Gikuyu. For me, I was very proud, and I would like more of that, because we all know that things can be translated. In other words, our literature is still undefined. We are still relying on cultures that don't belong to us. We can domesticate them, but I think we also have ours that we can integrate in this foreign culture that colonized us and that we are still living with. In other words, we are still colonized theoretically, linguistically, and I think we must do something about it to enrich that colonial yoke that we still agree to live with. I think I'll stop at that and not read through everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Muker, for your presentation. We've just overcome the technical challenges of connectivity, but we are grateful for what we've done so far. We've just fallen slightly behind our schedule, and so without wasting further time, you'll allow me to invite our next speaker, who is Professor Wangui Wagoro. As the issue of gender has just come up in our discussion a few minutes ago, you'd allow me maybe to say a thing about Professor Wangui Wagoro by way of introduction, and then we will allow her or request her to come and speak to us. Professor Wangui Wagoro is a well-known name in terms of humanities scholarship and translation. She is known as a translator, as a writer. She's a poet and an academic of high standing, a cultural curator and an editor who has focused a lot on languages and their relationship to literature and freedom. She currently runs the International Intercultural Dialogues of Africa in Translation, AIT. She's also a co-convener, or has served as a co-convener of the Women's Caucus of the African Studies Association, and has served as the deputy president of the African Literature Association. She has been honored with an honorary professorship of practice in translation at the School of Oriental and African Studies, as well as with a visiting professorship at King's College in London. She has been involved in extensive literary criticism and translation and writing, and her recent works have also featured where she's actually written creative and literary works in some of the acclaimed collections, such as Margaret Busby's New Daughters of Africa, and others. She is particularly well known in our corner of the earth as having been the translator of Ngugi wa Thiong'o's earlier works, as well as those of Veronique Tajo. Her work, in a nutshell, speaks for itself, and it's for this reason that we requested her to come and share her experiences regarding how the Department of Literature has shaped her growth and development in her career as a literary scholar and practitioner. Professor Wangui Agoro's title today is The Influence of University of Nairobi's Department of Literature and My Life Career in Literature and Translation. Professor Karibu, welcome and have your presentation.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
It's a great honor and delight to be here, Dr. Shiondu and Professor Jennifer Mushiri and the Dean and my fellow and colleague presenters and the audience that we have. It's a real great honor for me. It's the first time that I'm presenting at the University of Nairobi Literature Department. So this is a kind of homecoming for me, and it's very emotional to hear these debates, which have been theoretical for most of my academic life, and to hear them continuing in a vibrant and lively manner. Ningefurahi sana kuwazungumzia kwa lugha ya Kiswahili, lakini kwa shida hizo tumesikia kwa sasa hivi sitaweza, kwa sababu sikuweza kutafsiri maneno yangu, kwa hivyo nitawazungumzia kwa lugha ya Kimombo. What is Nairobi University? Is it home? Goes to the source of my womb? Is it a place from which the waters flow, trickling or washing in directions? The Nile, splitting into two to find its own floodings and moorings. Is it the place of surrogacy that claims me still and calms my fears when I feel lost and seeking home? Or is it a dream of a place to be? Because the place of my ambitions not to be, a place I would come back to, and take with me always. It's a place of return from my weary journey, of searching for the golden fleece that once began there, here. Or is it a place that guides my feet always, that I can come and go in my magical thought and in person? Is it a place of freedom or incarceration or exile? Or is it a place that opens gates for the annihilation or exploration? Is it a place that one makes us citizens of home or the globe? Is it a place of such? Tell me, what is Nairobi University? Is it a place that started friends and foes? Is it a place that sent me round the world? Is it the place that gave me fellow sojourners and sister sojourners, and sowed its seeds both far and wide? Is it the place that lit the flame around the world? And nurtured me? Is it the place of hope to which we now return? Tell me, what is Nairobi University and the literature department to me? As you will have heard, this is drawing from Cullen's poem, What is Africa to Me? And
yes, Prof, if you could move closer to your mic. We can barely hear you.
Can you hear me?
Please move a little closer to your mic.
Okay, so I wrote a poem which was echoing County Cullen's poem, What is Africa to Me? But I was asking the question about the University of Nairobi, what is it to me? So my reflections today take me on a very personal journey about a place where I never studied, although I feel that I belong here. I gained admission to the University of Nairobi in the class of 1980 to be part of the department, and I was really happy and excited, but was snatched by a scholarship to the United Kingdom. And this lives with me as a burden of ifs And if not, and what would have been? You see, I had already been attending the public lectures in the 70s as a secondary school student, in the 70s as a student, well described by those who pioneered those public lectures, such as Professor Michere Mogo, and as we've heard, Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and many others. And I was already well grounded in its orientation of bringing new and exciting intellectual discourses and engaging in literary explorations from a riveting and fresh approach, which was interdisciplinary, as we've already heard, and based on our own Kenyan and African reality. But then again, this wasn't new because I was a product of the decolonial literary tradition. As a young person from primary school, we had already started reading Michere Wamogo's, Professor Michere Wamogo's poetry for elocution. I remember very well. I took my child by the hand. It was the first poem that I learned. But we were not new in our curriculum in my generation. We were reading those African books. And I know that the African Literature Department had a lot to do in structuring that new curriculum. So I had moved to, in the 70s, what was a European school, in quotes. And so this shift to an African-centered curriculum was something really important in my personal life. And as I said, I remembered those poems, although, as I said, the impact of the poem, I took my child by the hand, what a huge impact it had on me, because it says, it was speaking to me personally as a person during the cusp of independence, and it was asking where were those matunda ya uhuru. So my consciousness started in an Afrocentric way from a very early age. So I'm very grateful for the influence of the department in my life. I must have been around 12 or 13 by then when I started reading Chinua Achebe, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Atsuko Rebecca Njau in secondary school. So for us, African-centered literature was quite normalized for my generation. And I've heard other speakers, and we've had panels with scholars such as Simon Gikandi, James Ogude, Ntai Mangola, Shigiri Tigiriki, Professor Wanjiko Kagera, and even with Henry Kakava, and he has written about this, that this transition, was, the decolonial transition, was very important for us in our country, and the government itself was moving towards decolonizing knowledge for us as African children through our education system. And so the department played, in my view and understanding, played a very important role. So this tradition continued. So my 6th year in school in Kenya until my pre-university education. As I said earlier, in the years of 77 to 79, we had become part and parcel of the University of Nairobi through the public lectures, but also we had access to the traveling theatre, which featured the likes of the late Waigwa Wachira, and also the academics were coming to our schools. I remember very well Sotsi and we were students, but we already knew these people. And I know that my friend, teacher, Mrs. Wangi, is here, so I'd like to acknowledge her because she was my secondary school teacher, and I know she's in the audience. And I'm very thankful to them for the invitations that they gave us of this which then opened the world to us to be able to study our literatures centered and rooted. So there in the lectures, we heard about Rodney, Amilcar Cabral, and so many Kamal Braithwaite. And as Evan was saying, we didn't hear very much about the women scholars, but we knew them because they were around and we were reading them. Rebecca Njau, Asenet, Kitaka, and so many others. So we were aware of them, and the books were available in my school library. Fast forward, I went to university again, to England, and back to European. Asked about culture, and Joyce asked the question about the location of subjects. And those are the types and the learning French, English, and Italian, the question of working in the first language came to the fore. Not what was happening far away in Kenya, but in my course. If you're going to be a translator, which was my dream, you had to learn and present the first language, which in my
Hello,
case.
Professor Wangu, if you could just move a little closer to your camera again, please.
Okay, so in my case, my mother language would have been Kikuyu, and of course I could not offer Kikuyu for my learning at the university in Europe. So I offered, sadly, English as my first language, and this bothered me emotionally a great deal, having come from an African-centered literary tradition. This soul-searching coincided with the big moment of Ngugi's big epiphany of writing in his mother tongue, Kikuyu, and his famous farewell to English. And this gave me a lot of encouragement. And I must say and thank my parents very much for allowing me to learn my mother tongue and having been in the class. Many of you know that the tradition encourage people from learning in their mother tongues, or even them, and we were punished, as Ngugi has recorded in his book. And even in my generation, we were punished, and it wasn't exciting. So I came to and spoke to him, and I told him, not quite so truthfully, I regret that I was a translator and that I was interested and willing to translate those children's books into English. But he did check with me and me, and he said it was okay, and that is how my career in translation began. I translated Jabanane and his pistol, and Jabanane and Flying Bus, and the other book. Jabanane and the crocodile. And then, of course, I translated Matigari, which many of you know its history. It was withdrawn from the shops and it was not on the curriculum, but this is widely debated. But it meant that I was out there floating in Europe with my translations, and I've been floating with my translations out there for a while. But I haven't wasted my time. I went on to do my PhD in translation studies and to teaching in the discipline, because I was very encouraged by the potential of translation. And much of what I've done is documented on media, so I will not go into it. But I'm not saying this to show off about myself, but I'm speaking on behalf of very many of my peers of my generation, who you talked about, who studied on those boards at the university and far, far beyond, because I'm a member of many associations internationally and everywhere I go. The University of Nairobi and this literature department is cited as a groundbreaking orientation. As many of you know, now there's a big debate at Cornell University about centering the language again. And it's taking us back to the University of Nairobi conversations, and it's spearheaded, ironically, and it's funny how history turns, by colleagues in the department in Cornell, and Komokoma Wanguge, who is here with us, is part of that, and perhaps you could speak to it. So most recently, as you've heard, because of the University of Nairobi's, my work is valorized because of the University of Nairobi. I don't come from nowhere. I come from a home that, although I didn't study there, I'm getting all these accolades because of the work that I've done, because of conversations that have come out of the University of Nairobi. So I owe this to the department, and I'm very thankful. So to conclude, I want to share a few translations about translation. It is a very exciting field. If we can go back, as Professor Muker has said, if we could go back to our mother tongues I was 23 when I was able in my mother tongue. And it was emotionally quite difficult if you've been educated in a colonial sense, where you're not centered as a human person. So for me, it was a very deep moment of conflict. So when I heard the debate happening about African and African languages, which went on in the 80s, and the so-called conversation between Achebe and Gugi about what language we must write in, for me, it was a no-brainer because I was already working in my mother tongue and I didn't want to join those conversations because I was demonstrating the power of translation and the power of knowledge of our conversation, of our languages, and the kinds of very rich that they could bring for literature. So for me, the primacy of orature and translation, and going back to our embedded knowledges, which we all carry. And I would like to cite something that Professor Abdilatif Abdallah pointed out, that to some degree, there's a great potential between the lines that are born in the mind, because when they are born as a feeling, even a fleeting, unconnected thought, sensation, or sensibility, they are transferred to the narrative, whether written or oral, and they're also transferred through song, visual art, performance, theater, word, or even feelings. And they may be in the DNA or in the sixth sense. And I have argued now, as others, that science shows that DNA has memory. So the muse may not be an immediate muse, speaking in the words of languages known, or tangible materiality, but the insistence of the muse may be coming from more primordial memory or memory from childhood. And science is beginning to tell us that these codes and stories are stored already in our bodies. But what is exciting here is that our languages are living around us and we cannot pretend that they're not there. And what makes me happy, the young people are working in Sheng, they're working in visual arts, they're working in song and dance and music, and they're bringing the literary practices to the popular culture and the comic form and so forth and so on. And I think we will be remiss if we remain in the ivory tower and look at the impact of these developments of translation out there. So I think that the importance of valorizing the hidden original text that resides in orality and in our location as Africans living in African bodies and living in African context, wherever we are in the world, that is very important for us as African readers, writers, critics, translators, scholars, and members of society. And much public transaction takes place through the storytelling. We all tell stories. I'm telling you a story now. So for me, the importance of bringing the African languages and translations to the core is critical. Primacy of such approaches for Renaissance is advocated in Chapter 5 of the African Vision of 2063 and in our own constitution here in Kenya. So there's a lot more that I want to say, but I think that we're at a moment of a cultural turn. There's more and more translation. Sukiswa Warner has been doing conversations. I've been curating conversations in translation for the last 20 or so years. But for me, we are still back 50 years where there was a famous 1962 discussion at Makerere University of what is African literature. And I don't think we have moved very much. So I want to leave that as a provocative that Obiwali asked us about German and French literature being and asking if Italian literature in Hausa makes that Italian or Hausa literature. And I want to close with Wangari Maathai's story, which is the story of the hummingbird, where the little bird with its little beak carried water on with its little beak to put a big forest fire out, and the elephant and the giraffe and the lion was standing by. And they asked the hummingbird with her little beak, "What on earth are you doing?" Because that has been the response to my work in translation, but this has really changed. And she said, the little hummingbird said, "I can only do the best that I can." So I think that there is also the threat of the genocide of our languages if we do not protect them through our literatures, which underlie our societal way of life, the stories we tell and the stories that we hear that nurture us. So I wanted to end that this contestation that continues is not only national, it happens across the continent because of our colonial legacies. And I don't think that this has ended. I keep hearing words such as soft diplomacy. And I know that this is not soft diplomacy, it is hard diplomacy, which can kill our languages and make us non-people. And with that, I would like to thank you very much. We love this university department. We are thankful for the gift and the joy. It has given me a livelihood. It has given me friends I would have never dreamt of having, and a community of learning. And it has offered me freedom, and it has offered freedom, as was said by the Dean, to all of us, because I have been part of that community that has been contributing to the second liberation. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much, Professor Agora Agora, for ending our second session of our discussion today on such a high note. Thank you so much. What I would like to do then is to invite us to a brief question and answer series, just to reflect on issues that have emerged out of the presentations of our four speakers who've already shared their experiences with us. I think the critical thing for us to do is to acknowledge the fact that from all our speakers, the common denominator, if you allow me the cliche, is the fact of their strong and deep attachment to the University of Nairobi's Department of Literature, as well as their attachment to the discipline itself and what it can do to transform humanity. Professor Indangas's presentation, which was the first one, raised what I consider very critical questions regarding the points of departure, whether we are departing from the point of fact or from the point of fabrication, as well as issues to do with how well an institution can archive its own records with regard to the memo that has been the subject of tremendous intellectual energies across the world. This is a debate that I think many of us are familiar with, and one that we can pitch in at any one point and see. Professor Munge's presentation, which for me I found very fascinating in terms of unsettling the presumptions that we've always had in terms of the human being as being the most important creature on earth, but also unsettling the nature of our curriculum as we know it, in terms of what we found so canonical or so conventional, and how we can do, what we can do to push beyond the boundaries of the common. I think that his strong passion about what we need to do in terms of broadening our curriculum sufficiently to make us more aware of our calling is particularly critical for us, because it still takes us back to the initial question of how do we as human beings wrestle with the problem of prejudice against other people, prejudice against other creatures, prejudice against other people's choices and things like those. The third speaker was Professor Peter Muker, who took us down memory lane, taking us through what the department was like during his days as an undergraduate, and how his experiences in the US informed his later encounters with what was being taught in Kenyan universities. the idea that the Africanization of the department and the Africanization of the curriculum, had also taken place alongside the diversification of literature to include cultural studies years back, for me, I found to be a very interesting observation. That even though there have been some feelings that the department needs to reach out to include curriculum, rather to include cultural studies in its curriculum, this is something that has been going on for a very long time. And lastly, we've had from Professor Agora, whose association with the department has some very personal meanings to her, and whose travels outside the country, outside the department, have always given her reason to look back. And what I think Professor Agoro's presentation did is to show how, apart from leading its own revolutionary initiatives at the departmental level, this department also provided a home or a space for students to encounter revolutionary thought from other parts of the continent in terms of the thought patterns of the likes of Amilcar Cabral and others. And of course, her observation that the hidden text resides in orality, which can be brought to visibility by translation, is such a profound observation for me. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have like the next 10 to 15 minutes to just see if there's anything that we can get clarification from our speakers who are all present with us. I think as a matter of order, if somebody has a question, we would appeal to them to make it as brief as possible so as to save on time. And let's just have one question directed at the person you expect to answer, and then we shall move on to the next session of our presentations. Anyone you can raise your hand, you can otherwise alert the moderator, or then we can address our questions to the specific presenters. Hello, are we all there?
Yes, we are there.
Thank you very much, Professor Mwanzi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The four presenters are really a wonder, in the sense that they make me proud of still being serving as a member of the Department of Literature. I think Professor Wangui Agoro, I think she knows me very well. We have rubbed shoulders. You see, we have produced, and I start by saying that thank you for making me as a mother feel that the Department of Literature is actually a family, a good family, a good mother, a great family, because you have populated the earth with great minds. Whether some left through stress of being expressing opposite minds or dissenting voices, or went out to share with the international community, really is a plus on the department. Because without that, without the strength in the department, the exposure to world literature and national literature and Africa's literature, this would not have happened. Would not have had the appetite for seeking international recognition and rubbing shoulders with international community. At 50, I think one is mature enough to start again. I am told that at 50, men begin panicking about the future, the inheritance, what will they leave behind. while women are not explaining what we are, because I might talk about myself. But at 50, we are brave. And the papers that I've had so far are brave papers. When we can interrogate each other and find out some of the weaknesses that we have overlooked or glossed over. For example, Professor Indangas is pointing out the fact that Ngugi has really mesmerized the continent and the world from his writing and his movement and his mobility and loudness. But then when it comes to the Department of Literature, he has a BA, a Bachelor of Arts degree, that he found it not useful to study for masters. I don't know what of a mentor about mentoring the further study of literature in the department, how much he has actually contributed, his words of wisdom, how much they have contributed to the real actual study of literature, which is he has shunned by refusing to complete or failing masters, and then refusing to go to try it again, and then not getting a PhD, but accepting accolades around literature. I'm saying, I think what I'm saying is that there's something bright about his not having a BA, but coming out to talk about how literature affects the world, how literature can decolonize the mind from 1973 onwards. Maybe there's something positive in that exposure to literature at whatever level, even if at BA level, one's mind is developed. Literature develops the mind and the humanity and the sensitivity to human issues. And therefore, one can articulate relevantly and, in fact, develop more people and affect more people's thinking and even provoke the complacency that a society or a community may be holding about life. And I think Ngugi's provocative statements about indolence, about complacency, about our tendency to forget the effect of the colonial experience that our ancestors had, our fathers and mothers, and our great-grandfathers and so on. I think that provocation could be a plus. But I think when we point out that even as we say it's a great literary icon, we need to be conscious of the fact that this is an icon who was not academic accolades, academic status of as a literature product. Thank you. I could say more, but I'm not the presenter, and I can't say more. I just am happy. I rubbed shoulders with Ngugi. He was my final supervisor, looking at the revision that I had done, and he wondered why I had not chosen to do African literature, especially his novels, instead of working on Dostoevsky, who was so far away from me. But that was a conversation between a friendly lecturer and a listening student. So I really think I have gone through great minds, and I'm glad that my students, Evan Wangi, Professor, Wangwei, Goro, Professor, thank you very much. I think 50 years have paid, and I thank God, even as on my last, not last touch, but have post-retirement contract. I think it's worth keeping conversation with my department, our departments, from 69 to 2020 and 21. Thank you. Welcome, our good people.
Thank you very much, Professor Mwanzi. We should have taken some of the questions that were listed in the charts, but I'm not able to retrieve most of them as at now. However, I think if there's a colleague who strongly about
yes, Godwin.
they could allow me. Okay, Professor Ken Ombongi, do you have something to say?
Edwin, are you hearing me?
Yes, we are hearing you, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just make a comment and ask a small question. Colleagues, thank you very much. Actually, I'm from history. I'm from the Department of History and Archaeology here. And I'm very ignorant of things, literature. So forgive my ignorance if what I'm going to say doesn't make a lot of sense, and I hope it doesn't. I just want to join the rest in thanking the colleagues who have very ably put forth very nice, interesting ideas. Professor Ivan Mwangi, with your wonderful thoughts on some of the areas that we neglect. I really like the idea of taking in animals. In Africa, our lives are so intertwined with animals, but we tend to neglect them. Disability, our brothers and sisters who have been affected, and then the rest of the society who we ignore. Our senior academic, Professor Ndangas, well, very fascinating, and your long experience, very well captured in your presentation. And we take inspiration, those of us who are toddlers, that you are leading us. Madam Wangoye, and your very wonderful thoughts and contribution in translation. I look back to 2000, I think, when we met. I was Professor Lonsdale as a student in Cambridge then, and we met, and you were making a presentation at the time at the African Studies Center in Cambridge. Then, fascinating thoughts. And the Department of Literature, you have been a banner bearer for the university for very long. And that is a great thing. Now, this leads me to a small question I want to ask, partially because of my ignorance. And I'm asking this to all the presenters. Now, some years back, one of the literary scholars from this part of the continent seemed to suggest that East Africa is a literary desert. I'm requesting to hear reflections on that. In what context did he make that statement? And is there something that the Department of Literature here in Nairobi, which is one of the pioneer departments, of course there was Makerere before that, is there something that they did or didn't do that contributed to the making of this statement, which I'm sure you are familiar with, that East Africa is really a literally desert? I would like some comments from some of you, and forgive my ignorance on things literature, but I've always thought that literature and history, there is something that we share. We deal with the society, we deal with social material, but from different perspectives. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Professor Mbongi. Because we did not direct your question to any particular individual, may I use the liberty of a moderator to request Professor Ndangasi if he could kindly respond to your question.
Is there a chance to ask one before they go?
Okay, Prof. Yes, Professor Msonya.
Thank you, Dr. Siundu, for giving me this chance. Thank you very much, all presenters. I just want to ask a question to Professor Ndangasi. My question, I'll try to make it very direct. Is your sense that the nationalization and Africanization of the curriculum, literature curriculum, and the revolution, what we call the Nairobi Revolution, was a kind of loss to literature as a discipline. You know, that there was the loss of universalism and what literature itself as a discipline has to offer to humanity as a whole, that was sacrificed at the altar of trying to center the African experience. That's my question. Thank you.
Okay. Can I answer, Chair?
Yes, please carry on, Professor Indanga.
Yeah, let me begin with Ombogi's, Kenneth Ombogi's question first. The person who said that was Taban Loliong, who was my teacher. I interacted with all those guys. And Okot Pitek answered him by saying he was suffering from literary deafness, because Okot Pitek believed there was plenty of oral literature. So you cannot talk of a literary desert if there is so much oral literature, because Taban was only thinking about literature in English. He didn't bother to find out about the literature that was there in Kiswahili. We had plenty of mashairi. Taban Robert had written a number of novels, Kusadikika. Some of those novels were even studied in school. I remember studying Kusadikika as his novel in Form 4. So Taban was not thinking about literature in Kiswahili. He did not think about oral literature. And as I said, Okot Pitek hit back by saying you are suffering from literary deafness. Okay, but we had very few writings at the time. Now, even if Taban were to come back and talk of the literary desert, he would be wrong, because since then, a lot has been written. We have many writers, very many major writers. They've written a lot. So no one can talk about the literary desert now. As to Musonye, Dr. Musonye's question, I believed and I still believe that we lost something. One, as I said in my presentation, from an educational standpoint, it's good to move from the known to the unknown. So putting African literature at the center of the syllabus was a good idea. But the idea of studying other literatures from the standpoint of how they related to us, I think was a mistake. Because if you think about it, there are many classics out there. And I mentioned them in my paper. The Tale of Genji, which is a Japanese classic, doesn't mention Africa, doesn't mention Africans. But when you read it, you can relate to it as a human being. That is the universal that I was talking about. Hamlet does not mention Africa or Africans, but it resonates with us as human beings. It tells the human story. So to study literature from the point of view of how it relates to us, to Africa and Africans, that philosophy, that thinking that underpinned the syllabus was a mistake, and I still believe that. So from that standpoint, we lost something conceptually in terms of relating to literature as an institution. But the idea of putting African literature at the center, that's okay, because we are Africans. The syllabus is in Africa, in an African university. You move from the known to the unknown. That's how it goes. But I was thinking about the philosophy that underpinned that change in the syllabus. And by the way, since I still have the time, sorry, Chair, I have a longer paper, but the reason I went back to those archives, if you like, which I later get into in the paper, and I didn't have time to talk about that, was we had a problem after that because Ngugi rose to the level, after the publication of Petals of Blood, he rose to the level of associate professor without a master's, without a PhD. And he had employed a number of people in the department who didn't have PhDs, some of whom didn't even have master's degrees. But after Ngugi, the system hardened and they demanded PhDs. So those who didn't have them had to get them. But the thinking was, I went to many fora and they kept asking me, we are told that you don't need a PhD in literature. That is the idea they had at the time. And I would say, no, you need a PhD in literature. But because of the trajectory of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, getting to the level of an associate professor without a PhD, a lot of people felt they didn't need a PhD to be promoted all the way to the level of professor. But then the system changed and hardened against us. This is what I say later in my paper, but I didn't have time to go into that. But that was the reason I went back to those early days when we had these, I call them literary activists, who were saying all kinds of things, but they did not have PhDs in a university that had professors with PhDs.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Indangasi. I don't know what to make of your tone with reference to literary activists. That's maybe a conversation after this. I think this is an appropriate moment for us to proceed to the next and the second and last part of our webinar today. And our next speaker is Professor Arunji Chisina, who has been a professor of literature in this department for many years, and whose contribution is well known, especially in terms of growing the scholarship on oral literature, oral literatures from Kenya. Her title for her presentation today is Kenyan Oral Literature Revisited. Because we are slightly behind schedule, I will not take up much more time except to invite Professor Chisina to make her presentation. Professor Chisina, karibu sana. Hello, Professor Chisina. Anyone who has seen
Am I okay now?
Yes, Prof. Now we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Siondo, and everyone else. Let me start by saying humbly that I am not one of those colleagues who have been brought up by University of Nairobi. I was brought up elsewhere, but I did brush shoulders with the Department of Literature even before joining as an associate professor in the early 90s. Allow me.
Camera.
Sorry? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we would love to see you as well.
Oh, you can't see me. Let's see.
Yes.
Can you see me now? I can see myself at a corner.
Yes, we can see you, Prof.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I will not repeat what I said. I wasn't brought up at University of Nairobi, but I used to brush shoulders with the department even before I joined as an associate professor in the early 1990s. I would like to start my presentation, if I may, by mentioning that I feel greatly honored that Professor Michere Githae Mogo is with us today, because I consider her as my mentor. And in fact, if it were not for her, I really would not have been here today. I would not be even a tutorial fellow, leave alone being a professor, a full professor now at University of Nairobi. And my paper starts off with a song that I sang for Professor Michere Githae Mogo recently in my autobiography, because my paper is really a response to her questions in her collection of poems entitled Seeing My Daughter Sing. So, sorry, it is Daughter of My People Sing. But my own song to Professor Michere Githae Mogo goes like this. It is entitled to Michere, my friend, my sister, and my friend. You asked us to sing, Daughter of Our People. You asked us to dance, Daughter of Our People. You sounded the tune, Daughter of Our People. You glided the steps, Daughter of Our People. You resisted the thunders, Daughter of Our People. You resisted the tongue lashing, Daughter of My People, Daughter of Our People. You resisted blight, Daughter of Our People. You resisted despair, Daughter of Our People. You radiated beauty, Daughter of Our People. You radiated the sisterhood, Daughter of Our People. You radiated brotherhood, Daughter of Our People. You radiated motherhood, Daughter of Our People. You radiated nationhood, Daughter of Our People. You radiated diasporahood, Daughter of Our People. You radiated globehood, Daughter of Our People. You radiated our strength, Daughter of Our People. You radiated our light, Daughter of Our People. You radiated our melody, Daughter of Our People. You radiated peace, Daughter of Our People. I look at Kenya oral literature as a creative expression and propeller of culture. In other words, it is an art form that utilizes language, and it has a specific social function to serve. Its major role being to teach and give society a sense of moral direction. The genres of Kenyan oral literature include the riddle, the proverb, the song, and the oral narrative. My paper revolves around the survival of Kenyan oral literature in the face of changing cultural dynamics. I note that our theme is reflections on Kenyan literature, identity, and our being. At least that was the theme that was sent to us at the beginning. And my paper, therefore, is pegged on the fact that Kenyan oral literature is the mother of Kenyan literature. Hence, the title of my paper is Kenyan Oral Literature Revisited, with special attention on the role and position of women. in the paper, I attempt to answer or to respond to the question Professor Michele Mugo asked nearly 50 years ago in a poem entitled, "Where Are Those Songs?" Where are those songs my mother and yours always sang, fitting rhythms to the whole vast span of life? What was it again? They sang, harvesting maize, threshing millet, storing the grain. What did they sing, bathing us, rocking us to sleep? And the one they sang, stirring the pot, swallowed in parts by choking smoke. What was it the woods echoed, as in long file, my mother and yours, and all the women on our ridge beat out the rhythms, trudging gaily as they carried piles of wood through those forests miles from home. What song was it? And she goes on and on. But now, towards the end of that poem, Professor Michele Mugo poses a challenge. As she recollects with nostalgia how our women used song to unify themselves, to create harmony among themselves as they made appear lighter the burdens that society laid on their shoulders and their backs, I must say. The poet does more than remind us, the readers and the listeners and the dancers, about how women used the songs to confront the hostile society that used them as cheap labor and beasts of burden. So she challenges the younger women to confront their own hostile social environment with song, not to let that genre that was so useful for women disappear. And she says in the same poem, sing, daughter, sing. Sing. Around you are uncountable tunes. Some sang, others unsung. Sing them to your rhythms. Observe, listen, absorb. Soak yourself, bathe in the stream of life, and then sing. Sing ample songs for the people, for all to hear and learn and sing with you. In my response, I would like to inform the Professor Michele, that your daughters and our daughters have heeded to your call. They are creating new songs and reshaping the old ones to fit the contemporary circumstances. Women's mutual assistance groups of the past that had names like Ngwatio in Kikuyu, Kibagenge in Kalenjin, Nyoluoro in Doluo have bounced back, albeit with a new name. Since they are no longer necessarily for women speaking the same Kenyan language, the Swahili word chama has been found to be very useful in creating contemporary women's mutual assistance groups. Though there are still groups in which women assist one another in traditional work, such as cultivating shambas, in both rural and urban areas, cash-based merry-go-rounds are the most common. Each member gives a certain amount periodically, and the money so collected is then given to a chosen member in a merry-go-round style. But what is significant for this paper is that oral literature, Kenyan oral literature, plays a very important role in these women's groups. Songs are sung or danced to for solidarity, enjoyment, and even for protest against gender-based oppression. For example, a very short song that women use when at the beginning when they meet, they say, greet somebody, and they dance, greet somebody, tell her you love her, put your hands up, greet the next one, and they go on and on and on. So by the time they start on the business, they have already reestablished that harmony that they have always had. And they are guided by the spirit that each one undergoes the same kinds of experiences regardless of where in Kenya she comes from. At weddings, for instance, the women gather together as one, and they take it that a child does not belong to one woman. That is, the girl who is getting married does not belong to the woman who gave birth to her. She belongs to them all. So, although the women work very hard to prepare for the wedding, brewing the brew for all to drink, and preparing the food and all that, theirs is not it. They use song. The song and dance provides them with an opportunity to protest against social oppression. And I'll give you just one illustration, which is a song that is danced to by Embu and Umberia women. It's very popular at the weddings. They say, Kanyanya, let me push you along. Kanyanya, let me push you along so that you can deliver a message for me. So you can deliver that message to my son-in-law. Tell him to bring me a hairy he-goat. A hairy he-goat which can produce fat that I can rub on my shoulders, or sorry, that I can rub on my thighs. They are painful. While I was delivering this child, you men were hiding to avoid hearing my groaning, and the women go groaning. Because Professor Indangasi is here and he might misinterpret that groaning to be another kind of groaning, I will not groan very much. Let me just say that the women's message is actually not to the bridegroom. The message is to all men. They are using song to tell men that we are the ones who actually carry the brides, like the one we have today in our wombs for 9 months. We are the ones who look after her. We are the ones who have made it possible to live up to today. But we are accorded no respect, not even attention when you are preparing to marry off this daughter of ours. And they say that knowing very well that they are not even involved in the choice of the suitor. They are not supposed to say anything about the suitor. They are not supposed to say anything in connection with the bride negotiations for the bride price. And even when the actual wedding is going on. They are the ones who bear all the work, like cheap labor, as I mentioned, and there is no word even of appreciation for their work. So the women are posing as the mothers of this girl who is getting married, and they are just using indirect voice in order to make the satire poignant. I can see my time is running, so let me also mention to the professor that these songs, the songs, they are being sung not only through song as we know it, but they are also being sung through narratives, oral narratives. Daughters of Kenya are narrating new narratives that seek to empower women, and they are also reshaping old ones to fit into the mold that they want to use in order to confront this hostile social environment that still disregards women, that still wants to use women as beasts of burden, that is so much fraught with social injustices against women. In a collection of narratives that I am, Arunji Chisina and Joseph Muleka are editing, called Modern Oral Narratives. There is one illustration I would like to give you, and it is very short. This is by a daughter of ours, a first-year daughter. In fact, this girl would be actually my grandchild, called Abigail Kinyanjui. And this story shows that women need not continue crying for mercy in the face of gender-based domestic violence. What the young girl does, there is this very popular oral narrative in Kenya where hare tricks hyena that they kill their wives or their mothers. Now, what this girl does is that she reworks it so that in the end, it is not the women who suffer, but the men, symbolized by hyena and hare. Abigail gets hare and hyena to enjoy themselves at a beer drinking joint, which is in the open air. As hare's wife is going to the dry cleaners to take her husband's clothes, she sees these two, but they do not see her, hyena and hare. Neither, nor do they hear, nor are they aware that the woman, that is Mrs. Hare, overhears what they are saying about disciplining their wives. So on her return home, Mrs. Hare goes straight to her friend, Mrs. Hyena, and they both report the matter to the wife of the Mzee wa Nyumba Kumi, the head of 10 houses in the neighborhood. The three women hatch a plan without even involving the Mzee wa Nyumba Kumi. From then on, Hare and Hyena are rendered not only homeless, but also wifeless. They end up roaming the countryside, eating leftovers thrown in rubbish pits. What I have attempted to do here is to respond to the question of the future of Kenyan oral literature, particularly that Kenyan oral literature that touches on the role and position of women. What my conclusion is that Kenyan women are not only consumers of Kenyan oral literature, but they are also creators of the same. And they use that form to enhance their own situation and protest against a status quo that still undermines them. And what I am saying is that just as culture is dynamic, Kenya oral literature is also dynamic, and it will need a continued and deliberate effort to adapt this cultural dynamism in order to survive and be relevant in the 21st century. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chisina, for your presentation on the future of Kenyan oral literature and the place of women in it. We would like to move on to the next presenter. And as we can see in our programs, the next presenter was supposed to be Professor Wangari Mwai from the United States International University in Nairobi. And as at a few minutes ago, we had not managed to secure her presence because she was held up in administrative duties back at the university. For that reason, we want to proceed to the third speaker of the session, Professor Kitaka Umberia, who will present to us his thoughts about self-publishing and Kenyan literature. Professor Kitaka, welcome to make your presentation.
Can you hear me, Dr. Chundu?
Yes, Prof, we can hear you. If you could put on your mic, if you could switch on your mic.
If I can do what?
You could switch on your mic, your camera, sorry. Your camera.
No, I have a challenge with that. Usually I get my camera when I don't need it.
Okay.
Today that I need it, I'm not likely to locate it. I had it last week, throughout my classes last week. So I'm sorry about that.
No problem, that was it, Prof.
Yeah, let me begin by thanking the organizers for this conversation, for inviting me. As you know, most of you know, I'm probably the odd man out because my background is not literature, but linguistics. So when I'm invited to these discussions, I feel extremely honored. I see it as an act of generosity. So thank you very much for the organizers for letting me share my little thoughts with everybody. My topic this afternoon is self-publishing and Kenyan literature. And since I don't have the luxury of time to give you the roadmap of how I intend to present, let me go straight to the topic before me. The 1970s witnessed the entry into the Kenyan literature of the country's earliest self-published literature, or books. The books, written by David Mailu and published by his outfit called Kobu Books, included An Fit for Human Consumption, 1973, My Dear Mbotro, 1973, After 4:30, 1974, Troubles, 1974, and The Common Man in 1975. Mailu's books got a mixed reception. Teenagers and some adults served the books, they enjoyed the books. Parents and guardians were jittery about the potential of moral corruption of their children, and connoisseurs of literature were less than amused. Since Mailu's comic books of the 1970s, there have been other self-published works, including some by this presenter. Other self-published authors in Kenya include Nganga Mbogwa, Amondi Ochieng Kogol, Kibaya Laibuta, Chalawand Wamitila, Selomith Wamboi, and others. Nganga Mbogwa is the author of, among other books, The Terrorists of the Abandeas. Among Ochieng Kogol is the author of Kito Chenye Doa, and the Chalawand Wamitila, one of the most prolific Kiswahili writers, the author of Arufu ya Mapera. Kibaya Laibuta self-published anthology of poetry is titled Arrays in the Dark. Talking to the self-published authors in Kenya, one comes to the conclusion that self-publishing in the country is born of and driven by several complaints against the mainstream publishing houses, as well as the various desires on the part of the authors. Consequently, ladies and gentlemen, self-publishing is a solution. And I'm borrowing that term from the world of technology. I see a lot of companies advertising solutions on the social media. So self-publishing in Kenya is a solution in that sense of the word as used in the world of technology. And talking of technology and solutions, new technologies have made it easier for self-publishing authors to publish, market, and sell their books. There's a lot of information on the internet on self-publishing. Consequently, authors wishing to self-publish do not have to do it on a trial and error basis, like was the case in the years gone by. There are new printing options, such as print on demand, that allow self-publishing authors to print as few copies of their books as they want. One can print as few as 5 copies, as few as 3 copies, depending on their need. And sometimes they do that to test the waters before they print more copies that they might end up not selling. They are also easy to use and cost-effective marketing platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp, email, and text messages. Some bookshops are not keen on stocking self-publishing books, especially if they do not belong to the more popular book categories, such as biographies and autobiographies of well-known personalities, or if, of course, they are not written by people who have already made their name in the book industry. But by this obstacle of bookshops declining or being reluctant to stock books by self-published authors, it's not an insurmountable problem due to the book-selling channels such as Amazon, Wonderinda, eKitabu, and the African Books Collective. Therefore, self-published authors are able to sell through these channels, and talking to some of them, they seem to be quite happy with those platforms. They seem to be making some returns. Some of them seem to be making some good returns by the use of those platforms, online platforms. But self-published authors are also able to sell hand copy books locally, directly without the intermediary of bookshops. I mean, so some of them will just ask people to pay through M-Pesa and move to where the buyer is and deliver the book. Or somebody sends the money through M-Pesa, and then the self-published author sells the book on books with the bonda bonda to where the buyer is. And sometimes it takes a buyer a shorter time to get the book than if we were to go to the bookshop. I mean, you can imagine somebody in Umoja interested in a book that is authored by somebody in probably Langata. Instead of that person walking to the textbook center or walking to another bookshop in town, they just send the money to the other, and the other calls the boda boda, give them the book, and the book will get to the reader in the next, probably within maybe 20, 25, 30 minutes. Now, let me point out that some of the self-publishing authors also publish other writers. Chalwa Mitila, as I said, one of the most prolific writers in this country, has published probably more people, more books by other people than he has himself. He has published others, including one of the biggest names in Kiswahili fiction, the late Professor Euphrates Kesarahabi. And he has many, many, many books. Mitila's outfit called Vinmua has published many, many, many others. I say this, ladies and gentlemen, so that at the end we see that self-publishing is not necessarily a one-person serving kind of endeavor. They have quite some bigger role to play in Kenyan literature and Kenyan society. This presenter's outfit, called Marimba Publications Limited, has published several other authors, especially those dealing with the children's literature. So then what does this mean? It means that some of the self-published authors nurture, encourage, and sometimes motivate other writers. In other words, it's not merely about a question of getting a book out into the market, but it's also a question of telling people, maybe people who might not have written, say that, well, you don't have to be too afraid to go to the mainstream publishers. You don't have to be too afraid of going to Oxford University Press, of going to East African educational publishers, East African educational publishers, of going to Longhorn, of going to other big houses, that if you have a good manuscript, it can be published without you having to worry about waiting for feedback from reviewers for 4 months, 6 months, 1 year, as sometimes happens. Now, let me turn, ladies and gentlemen, to the question of whether or not self-published books are a legitimate part of Kenyan literature and Kenyan society. You recall that the title of my paper is Self-Publishing and Kenyan Literature. So we need to see how, whether or not self-publishing indeed fits within Kenyan literature and within Kenyan society. To respond to this question, let me begin by going back to Mailu of the 1970s. And allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to share with you a text on which a text that I encountered on the internet, and whose author the website did not make available. The text was presumably written in the 1970s and uploaded on the internet much later. The text regarding After 4:30, one of the Mailu's books, published in 1974, goes as follows. You are likely to find 3 copies of this book within the same family. For when the husband is reading it, he doesn't want his wife to know he is reading it. When the wife is reading it, she doesn't want her husband to know that she is reading it. And finally, when the mature children are reading it, they don't want their parents to know that they are reading it. That's how then you can find 3 copies, one belonging to the husband, the other belonging to the wife, and the third one belonging to one of the children and daughter or son of the couple. Now, even we take it that this quote carries with it an element of hyperbole, there's no denying it that after 4:30, and other books by Mailu, such as Unfit for Human Consumption. Other books by Mailu of the 1970s were read by many people. You know, I was growing up at that time, and I do recall hearing people talk about Mailu's books. So I know that many people, many Kenyans, especially the young people, read the books. So if many people read the books, if indeed there was a possibility of finding as many as 3 copies in the same home, the next question is, so what? I mean, the context of my paper, so what? So this. First, presumably, after people who had no tradition of reading literary works bought and read Mailu's books, perhaps out of sheer curiosity, they progressed into reading mainstream texts, which means, in the process, such people were recruited into reading literature. So in some sense, Mailu then served Kenyan literature by leading people who otherwise would have not have read literature into reading the mainstream texts. So somebody begins with after 4:30, and somehow they progress to the river between Whip Not Child and Grain of Wheat. They progress to Song of Laguino, etc. So to that extent, then, one can say Mailu's books of the 70s served Kenyan literature in some way. Number two, it is not too far-fetched, ladies and gentlemen, to assume that the books helped to improve the reading skills of the many teenagers or the many Form 1 and Form 2 boys who read them, you know, sometimes inside their desks, sometimes inside their beds in their homes. So it is not too far-fetched to assume that the books help those young people, those teenagers, to improve their reading skills, so that when they came to the mainstream texts to which they are introduced, probably in Form 3, Form 4, they were in a better position to read them. They could read them faster, and they could read them without straining to read, because they had read 2 or 3 or 4 of Mailu's books. Let me now make it, let me make a vital clarification, ladies and gentlemen. There's a whole world of difference between the self-published books of the 1970s and the majority of those published since the last 25 years. You know, the books, self-published books by people like Wamitila, by Ngangambogwa, by Achieng, by Amonde Ochieng Kokogol, by Kibaya Laibuta, etc. What do I mean by there's a difference? There isn't much in the context or style of Ngangas, the terrorists of their banderas, or Amondo Ochieng Kogo's Kito Chenyedoa, or Chala Wamitila's Harufia Mapera, to signal to the reader that the books are self-published. You just won't. If you buy Chala Wamitila's book, Harufia Mapera, if you buy Amondo Ochieng Kogo's book, Kito Chenyedoa, if you buy the terrorists of the banderas, there's absolutely nothing to tell you in terms of the content, in terms of style, in terms of packaging, in terms of production. There's nothing to signal to you that the book you have just bought is not published by the mainstream publishers in Kenya, that it is published by an individual called Wamitila or called Amondi or called Nganga. When one arrive at that fact, the fact that the book is so published by either going to the imprimatur page to see the details about the publisher, the printer, the year of the copyright, or if that information is given to you by somebody who is aware that the book is not published by the by one of the main publishing firms in Nairobi. I am talking, ladies and gentlemen, about the quality between the self-published books in the 70s and the quality of the books published today. And there are quite a number of publishers doing it today. I'm just mentioning a few names because in any case, we don't have much time to go into details. Now, another revelation, ladies and gentlemen, some of the self-published books have gone on to become certain books in the Kenya's education system, and they have become certain books to embed acclaim from students, teachers, and examiners. Indeed, some of them seem to have lingered on as certain books much longer than some of the books published by the main publishers. Why? Because they were so popular, they were so loved by students, by teachers, by examiners, that they kept on putting pressure on the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development to retain the books, because the examiners argued that they still can set questions, they can still come up with questions from those books without having to repeat themselves and without having to struggle. This is how some of those books have remained in the system for 7 years instead of the normal conventional 4 years. In fact, I know one of such books that remain in the teachers training colleges for I think 10 years. As people say, no, we are fine. The teachers will say, no, we are still fine with this book. The examiners will say, we are fine with this book. So then you see the difference between those kind of books and After 430 and Fit for Human Consumption and My Dear Botro of the 1970s. And that's not all. I mean, the fact that these books have, some of them have become set books, and people have liked them a lot, examiners and students and teachers, that's not all. The significance of some of the self-published books is clearly evident from what appears in academic journals, in what appears in traditional media, such as the newspapers, TV, and social media. If you take any serious journal dealing with Swahili literature, you really wouldn't go far before seeing Wamitila being mentioned. If you attend conferences, you will see that the presenters are dealing with some of those published books. If you attend seminars, you will see that you see MA students, PhD students, presenting proposals, defending proposals, working on some of the self-published books by some of the others that we have just talked about. Let me demonstrate, or illustrate rather, the significance of some of the books that I'm talking about. Last month, our president, His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, traveled to Nyeri to popularize the Building Bridges Initiative, otherwise called BBI. In one of the pictures taken in Nyeri, the audience that the president was talking to was very thin. Some Kenyans were very, very excited with the picture. One of the Kenyans, created a post combining the title of a self-published Kenyan play and the picture of His Excellency, the President, addressing the small audience. The post was then uploaded on social media platform. Soon, the trending of that picture was so massive. Indeed, one person, one colleague, one professor from the University of Nairobi wrote to the author of the book asking him, kuna utabiri? Because the professor thought there was something ominous in there because of the trending of that picture of the president with the title of the book. So the professor thought that maybe something terrible, something ominous was about to happen in the country. The author, of course, wrote back to say, when he was asked, kuna utabiri? He said, la, hakuna utabiri. Sina habari kwamba kuna utabiri. So that's the significance of some of the books that we have today that are so published. Allow me, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, to be rather speculative in what I'm going to say, and I do it with the utmost humility. Some Kenyans seem to be using some of the self-published works of literature to frame their understanding and description of political events in this country. And I've said, but I say this with all humility, and this is really speculative. There seems to be some evidence of at least some Kenyans using some of these books to help them understand, to help them describe some political events in the country. It looks as though, ladies and gentlemen, that we Kenyans are using some of these works to frame how we see and talk about ourselves. It looks as though sometimes the works are used as a springboard for our day-to-day political discourse. That's how far we have moved from the 70s to today in terms of self-publishing. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to make explicit what up to this point has been implicit. Self-publishing in Kenya is not an exercise in futility, not a vain of redundancy. On the contrary, it is a solution. And I say I'm using the word solution as borrowed from the world of technology. On the contrary, self-publishing in Kenya today is a solution, is seen as a solution, functions as a solution, a worthwhile solution, a solution positively impacting Kenya literature and Kenya society. Positively impacting Kenya literature and Kenya society to a point where if something were to say they are peripheral to Kenyan literature, Kenyan society, I think one will not be making a fair assessment of those books. To say that Wamitila's Arufia Mapera, it's not in the mainstream of Kiswahili literature, would to deny a fact that many other people would not deny. So then, so publishing today at this critical place in Kenyan literature, this critical place in Kenyan society. It is, ladies and gentlemen, so publishing today is a solution, not unlike innovative interventions that we have seen in other sectors of the Kenyan society. Kenyans, I think we are quite innovative, and we have been talking about these innovations, interventions, to solve our problems in many sectors of our life. And so publishing then should be seen, and it is a solution, just like those other solutions, innovative interventions that we find people making in other endeavors of our society. So it is a solution, and a solution worth of our respect as readers of literary works, as scholars of literature, and of course, as the citizenry of this country. So then it looks like the days when you used to frown on these works are over, and that now we have works, so-published works, so-published works that it can stand their ground, their own against books published by the main major houses in Nairobi. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I end my short presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kitaka Umberia, for your presentation on self-publishing. I saw in the chat that a number of our colleagues had raised questions about the dilemmas associated with it, but your conclusion has sort of answered those questions. Now we...
Just a moment, Just a moment, Dr. Yeah, I think that there's one one thing that I skipped that, I mean, let me answer that question before it comes.
Is it possible, Prof, we'll give you time at the end of it all, if you don't mind. Eh?
Oh, okay, thank you. No, I don't mind. I don't mind. Thank you. Thank you.
Fine. I was saying that it's now, because we are falling further and further behind schedule, we want to end the session by listening to a presentation by Professor Michere Mugo, after which we'll retreat to question and answer discussion session. Professor Michere Mugo, as she's well known to all of us, does not really require an introduction in a society of literary scholars. However, I would just like to mention that she is currently a Professor Emeritus from the Department of African American Studies at Syracuse University, where she retired about 4 years ago. And among the things that attributed to her was her celebration as among the top most influential Kenyans, the top 100 influential Kenyans. This is an honor that she was accorded by the East African Standard Century. She has edited numerous works of literature. She has co-authored numerous works of literature. And as we heard from Professor Arunji Chisina, and as we have also seen from the comments in the chat room, her literary contribution to society at large speaks for itself. Among the two last things I'll say about her before we invite her to speak is the fact that in December 2013, she was awarded the Elder of the Burning Spear, a recognition that is accorded to very few. And in 2013, she won the Mwalimu Julius Nyerere Distinguished Lecturer Award. Professor Professor Michere Mugo is known to most of us because of her work on Kenya's restoration or struggle for the restoration of its dignity in terms of historicizing Mau Mau struggles, but also in terms of empowering female voices that, as has become clear in our discussion today, somehow remain marginalized despite the best efforts to center and recenter all those. For that reason, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite Professor Michere Mugo to offer her presentation to us, which presentation is entitled Poetizing the Department of Literature, University of Nairobi as a Curriculum Trailblazer for Transformative Humanizing Knowledge in the Orate, Written, and Performed Arts. Professor Michere Mugo, welcome. Now your opportunity to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for those very warm words, Mwalimu Siondu. Thank you, thank you. Can you all hear me? I hope so. I greet, okay. I greet you very, very, very warmly. It is such a joy to see some faces that I know. I won't name you one by one because I've been given a window of 15 minutes only, and the clock has started ticking. But lovely to see you all. I greet you. I embrace you virtually, of course. Before I deliver my remarks, I wish to thank Dr. Jennifer Nyambura-Muchiri for inviting me to participate in this whole historical event in the commemoration of the University of Nairobi's 50th anniversary. I also wish to congratulate you, Dr. Muchiri, and the entire
Prof, your mic is off.
Oh, is there a way we can reach her?
Professor Githai, your mic is off. Please turn it on.
Mic is off, Prof.
Hello?
Yeah, we
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Now.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Okay.
Siundu,
Yes,
I hope she can hear you. We can hear you, Professor.
we can hear you, Prof.
Yeah.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
I'm so sorry. I hope this does not count too much against my time, but my late mother, who died at 94, had a way of accusing Satan of anything that went wrong around her. And one day we had given her tea. She was sitting on the veranda, started dozing away, and then a chicken came and hit her cup of tea and it poured. So she told me, you know, Satan has just been here with his mischief. I thought it was a chicken that poured your tea and you had carelessly left it here. So my people, I think Satan is around here creating all kinds of problems. It took us a long, long time to get on board and be able to so here we are. I was saying that before I deliver my remarks, I wish to thank Dr. Jennifer Nyamburi for inviting me to participate in this historical event in the commemoration of the University of Nairobi's 50th anniversary. I also wish to congratulate you, Dr. Muchiri, and the entire Department of Literature on organizing this webinar. It is your rightful claim to the important role that the department has played over the years in placing the University of Nairobi on the international map of progressive academia, especially in the eyes of scholars of the arts and the letters. Indeed, the department is famous not just for its role in organizing critical discourses pertaining to orature and literature, but also to the evolution of new, inventive theoretical paradigms for understanding these art forms. It is a distinct joy to be home with you, albeit virtually, because the Department of Literature was my first academic home as a professor or lecturer, as my title was then when I joined the department in 1973. Ancient times back, right? Don't say no, because I know many of you beautiful ones were not yet born then. To parody Ayukoyama's novel title, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. Thankfully, and notwithstanding this famous Ghanaian and Pan-Africanist writer, and my friend at that, you were ultimately born. I salute you. I am home in another sense when I'm here with you. When I was at the University of Nairobi, the Department of Literature was like a family unit. I hope it still is. In this regard, I was delighted to learn from Dr. Jennifer Muchiri that her late father, Joe Muchiri, was a student member of our family, now headed by her daughter Nyambura, and that I taught him between 1973 and 75. Life can indeed be full of surprises and ironic twists. May his soul rest in eternal peace. Ashe, Afia, Moyo. One more remark before I embark on my presentation. Many of you know that I was a professor at the University of Nairobi. However, I doubt that more than a handful of you know that once upon a time, ages before you were born, I was also a postgraduate student at the University of Nairobi. In abbreviation, the story is that on graduating from Makerere University in 1966, I enrolled for teacher training at the University of Nairobi in September of that same year, graduating from the Faculty of Education in 1967 as a member of the pioneering class that launched the postgraduate diploma in education at the University of Nairobi. That was 53 years ago, my people, by the way. For this reason, it is an additional honor to be a fellow celebrant and on this 50th anniversary of our university. And now a comment on my style and method of delivery. Although I once took pride in being called a lecturer, I am no longer an adherent of the lecturing culture. I now believe that academic discourse should be dialogical, positioning the speaker and the audience face to face in a two-way conversation. For this reason, in my presentations, I like using aesthetics referred to as call and response, inviting participation from my audience from time to time. I do this by interrupting myself to ask them questions like Abantu, and they say, yo, and I ask, shall I speak? And hopefully they say, I never have found out what I would do if they said no. Anyway, more of the interruptions go, may I proceed? And they say yes. Or wenzangu, are we still together? So on and so forth. I might even throw a trick question such as Abantu, and they say, yo, are you napping? This way, I'm able to check whether the audience has gone to sleep on me. Now, you will be surprised at how many times I have received the answer yes to my question, are you sleeping? When I catch people unawares and they say yes, say, okay, wake up and let's move on. I regret, therefore, that this virtual forum and presentation will not allow for this kind of interaction. So, at the risk of being called what people who speak to themselves are known as, I will improvise for the audience by answering myself. My remarks are entitled, Poetizing the Department of Literature as a Curriculum Trailblazer for Transformative Humanizing Knowledge in the Orate, Written, and Performing Arts. Allow me to expound on the title briefly. Abantu, I hear you say you. Shall I begin? I hear you say, I have the road. The core and sum of my opening and closing arguments is that knowledge and education should never be imprisoned behind the barbed wire of abstract theory. Educators should emphasize the application of knowledge, knowledge that transforms stunted and oppressive reality into an arena of infinite life possibilities. Knowledge that liberates rather than enslaves. To echo the late Paulo Freire of Brazil, my favorite educational thinker. Transformative scholarship should convert stagnant academic theorizing into what my former Syracuse University Chancellor, Professor Nancy Cantor, used to advocate as scholarship in action. This is the vision that the Department of Literature at the University of Nairobi has always embraced. I say has because I understand and I hear about the good work you're doing there. Permit me to propound this vision further by plagiarizing myself and quoting from the introduction to my book of essays and speeches, Writing and Speaking from the Heart of My Mind. I quote, drawing the beat from the heart of my mind, these essays and speeches seek to be conversational, aiming at dialogue with the reader. They deliberately avoid using alienating postmodernist jargon. I offer no apology in embracing the notion that my mind has a heart. This is because I am persuaded that the challenge of the 21st century is not to flaunt knowledge, but rather to humanize it by using it to name, to seek agency, and then map out alternatives for the collective advancement of all global society, especially the powers. With this in mind, I wish to posit that by changing the Department of English to the Department of Literature in the late 1960s, the main movers of this transformative motion at the time, among them Henry Anyumba, Taban Loliong, Gugiwa Diongo, clearly recognized that colonial education and its paradigms were neither validating nor liberating to the learners. Thus, by revolting against the monopolism that deified English and English literature, making them supreme and therefore ordained points of reference for studying the written word. In demolishing the Department of English, the trailblazers were creating what I call a liberated educational zone. Now, in my view, a liberated zone is created when the dominated decide they are done with being what V.S. Naipaul, the Trinidadian novelist and scholar, calls, quote, mimic men. Let us engender his language and call them mimic people, mimic persons. The trailblazers drew the red line and rebelled. John Lewis, the late Black US congressman, would say they created good trouble. They insisted on self-naming and self-recognition, that embracing themselves, their people, their heritages, and their world. Wenzangu, yo, may I continue? Yes, I will. You have no idea what lasting terror this colonial deification of the English heritage unleashed on the colonized has learned, not to mention on their psyches. As Frantz Fanon warned, mental colonization is more difficult to eradicate than physical activity. You know that. Good people, when I was a child, calling someone Amzung was the highest compliment you saw on him or her. Oh, you time like a Mzungu. You are dressed like a Mzungu. I recall how often we are exhorted as children to pursue education, quote, until we speak English the nose. Imagine that. Meanwhile, like the owners of the term, of the tongue were sitting there laughing at us and our idiocy. Indeed, up to the time I sat for my O-levels in 1960, a credit in English language was mandatory for admission into university. Imagine how many students who were weak in English, but brilliant in, say, science, math, history, Kiswahili, so on and so forth, were denied their right to higher education, thrown down the drain because they didn't have a credit in English language. Wananchi, you get that? I hear you say yes. So allow me to pause and poetize the trailblazers who birthed the Department of Literature at the University of Nairobi, overturning English and the Anglicization of knowledge. Let us hail the trailblazers who dared to call out colonial arrogance and its dismissiveness towards other people's indigenous heritages, especially those of the colonized, treating them as irrelevant, irritant, and viewing them as inferior sites of human knowledge, to wit, as arenas of ignorance, backwardness, and stern darkness. Abantu, are we together? I know we are. Before the clock silences me, allow me to claim my elder's privilege and take an illustrative diversion in the fashion of some wazee who used to entertain Kenyans in a Kiswahili kipindi that played in the early 70s, known as Wazee Wakumbuka. These brand elders, I tell you, were never ever in a rush to make an argument. And so they would subject their listeners to hilarious, long meanderings from Kisumu to Kakamega, then to Nakuru, then going up to Meru on a diversion and back again before making the journey to Mombasa with their argument. So people would just have to sit and listen to them. So now my elders meandering today is in the form of a begging for a favor, namely that we vow not to use the term oral literature henceforth. If we still do, let us call our verbal art by its true name, orature. Good people, I beg you, as a term, oral literature is not just an oxymoron, but in my view, a demotion of the heritage by treating it as a site of knowledge that cannot stand on its own. This is why the West have used literary theories to try to understand literature and failing to do so. Even a famous scholar such as Ruth Finnegan once declared that in what she called oral literature in Africa had no drama, which is really outrageous, because if there is a heritage that has drama and performing arts, those cultures are to be found in Africa. But I'm arguing that it's an oxymoron, in my view, to speak about oral literature. And it's a demotion, in my view, of the heritage by treating it as a site of knowledge that cannot stand on its own, as I have said. The term robs orature of its subjectivity, turning it into a mere adjective for describing literature. Literature thus becomes the essence, the subject, and the noun. Wajama, am I making sense? Even if you disagree, let us continue debating. I stand in total agreement, therefore, with Piyozi Rimu, Austin Bukenya, and the rest of the Makerere School of trailblazing scholars who maintained that in orature and literature, we are looking at two distinct heritages. They are not at war. They may even overlap in some places, but they are two distinct heritages. In some, orature is orature, period. As the Makerere School argued, in Latin, literature describes the written heritage, and hence the school's coinage of the term orature to describe the oral or the orate spoken heritage created through oracy skills. Fellow scholars, I am saying orature is orature, and therefore let us call it orature. But let us continue to disagree as well. We used to do that a lot at the University of Nairobi. It would sometimes take me an hour to move from the building, education building, to wherever the place where we used to have a bar was, the common room was. It would, because you are being stopped by students every moment, and they are telling you, Mwalimu, I disagreed with what you said. Mwalimu, I have been reading and you're wrong about this. And I'm telling you, these students educated us. I stand, therefore, again in total agreement with Austin Bukenya and Piyozi Rimu and the rest of the Makerere heritage in saying we should honor orature by developing its own independent theories to say what is happening in that field. Join me then in embracing African orature as the center that holds, and in welcoming African literature as a testimony that Africa never fell apart when Achebe saw things fall apart from the terror of colonial occupation and miseducation. Hear Carter Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro. I say African origin remained and remains alive despite colonial indoctrination. Come, let us celebrate the trailblazers for their creative rebellion in rejecting and enforced amnesia and daring to, quote, talk back. Excuse my borrowing from Bell Hooks, the African-American author of the seminal work of feminist theory, Talking Back. Hail to the trailblazers for rescuing our indigenous sites of knowledge from erasure, from dismissal as alternative knowledges, from the arrogance of exclusion by snobbish colonial intellectual exterminators. Wananchi, may I go on? You said yes. Upon reinstating orature and African orature to their prime place in the studies of written performed artistic, the trailblazers then returned to the source, thus heeding Amilcar Cabral's call. They revisited African indigenous sites of knowledge to identify ethics and aesthetics that defined orature and its offspring, the written version, as authentic African forms of art in Africa. The scholars sought to unearth grown indigenous theories that would liberate orature from imposed dependency on Western literary theory. It is indeed my understanding that up to now, the Department of Literature still sends its orature students in the field to their communities to collect stories, poems, songs, riddles, myths, legends, so on and so forth, and to conduct research in an effort to continue evolving homegrown theoretical formulations that explain what verbal art is all about. We have to do this if we are to sit with heads high on conference tables talking with other scholars. We have to bring something that is unique, something indigenous for ourselves in order to respect the world. You relate with me then in praise of the trailblazers who placed orature and African orature curricula at the heart of the students' learning experience. Yes, celebrate African heritages as proud sites of knowledge, worthy and capable of sitting at the conference table as the equals of other global sites of knowledge. Bear with my purposeful repetition, African orature style, as I reiterate that by sitting at the heart of African indigenous artistic heritages, we not only experience the fire warmth, but we are home. We also take its artistic embers with us to illuminate the way as we walk the talk. Salute to the trailblazers for awakening in us the urgency of embarking on the imperative metaphorical journey back home. The urgency of heeding Cabral's call, urging us to return to the source as an indispensable part of our education and liberation. Time stands between me and you, between me and the rest of the story that should be told. But this story and others will have to wait to be told at another celebration. It is the story of how in the 1970s, we in the Department of Literature traversed the whole of Kenya from north to south, from east to west. And I mean this literally, speaking to schools and communities and colleges about our new approach to the teaching and learning of literature. Or how can I sufficiently poetize our trailblazing creations of the 1970s without appearing to be like a composer of self-praise poetry? For I was a member of the department team by then, a team in contestation with a group of colonial human leftovers, remnants of hardcore colonials. Regrettably, They were also aided by a class of colonized African zombies suffering from a debilitating form of colonial hangover. But to be transparent, we too were hardcores of a different kind, bent on spreading the gospel of creating complementary and complementary interdependent circles of knowledge. For us, the nucleus or core of the primary of African origin, with African literature forming the next layer, followed by the literatures of the African diaspora with a focus on the African American and African Caribbean heritages. I had the honor of introducing courses such as Black Aesthetics and teaching African American literature. Only after including diaspora and Africans did we then introduce other layers, presenting world literature with other world literature. And listen to this, including English literature. Colonial British scholars could not forgive us for putting their literature, their heritage as a part of the world literature. But we did, and we engaged these foreign heritages in heated debate, or our students did. But we debated as equals, not looking at them as superiors or mentors. How do I narrate the epic of our invasion of the then still colonial occupied Ministry of Education? We stormed the entire metaphorical fort, including the curriculum unit, there in partnership with patriots and matriots of education officers such as Walimu, Dr. Edgar Chukia, Mwalimu wa Kivaga, Wasambo Were, Mary Gakunga, and others. We managed to change the school curriculum, matching it to the one we had created in the Department of Literature. From where do I begin to describe my excitement in serving as the very first African chief examiner of A-level literature, overseeing the setting of exams and training examiners from all over East Africa? How do I poetize the good work of young trailblazers assisting me under the formidable task of colonial paradigms of assessing knowledge among high school students and replacing it with our own measurements? Some of them are right here in today's celebration. And to arrive the hour and minute arms of the clock, I would stand still so that the likes of China could elaborate on this story that I am telling, for she was one of those examiners and trailblazers. Will have to be told some other day. That day, we will poetize the traveling theater from the Department of Literature at the University of Nairobi. We will poetize this as a taker of education. People, ordinary people, they turned the village squares open. We will recite poems in traveling theater that transported knowledge and transports knowledge, delivering it through entertainment, a form that people readily understand and absorb while they learn through the performances they are watching. And then traveling theater, Department of Literature, University of Nairobi, engages them, treating them as intellectuals in debate and dialogue following the performances, analyzing what they have seen and adding to what they would like to see. Let us embrace this as humanizing knowledge, humanizing education. As I wind up, come marvel with me at this historical feat of ousting colonial educational occupiers. Come and listen to the riveting epic of resistance and the staging of an drama that overthrew occupying colonial invaders and created a liberated site of knowledge, the Department of Literature. Welcome to this celebration of a place many of us call home, a liberated zone of academia was birthed through pain and struggle. Come, celebrate this glorious birth and wasafiri wenzangu, I hear nam. I am told my time is over. Shall I end? Now it's at this point that I usually tell my audience to loudly shout no, that I can go on. But for my own sake, I will stop because I don't want to be like the proverbial professor in a fictional joke that I'm always telling and that I told from my former university chancellor at the University of Zimbabwe. He told this story. This professor was giving a 1-hour inaugural lecture, but the man got carried away, spoke through the first hour, into the second hour, into the third hour. And by this time, people started leaving to go home. They had to collect children from school. They had appointments. People had to leave. The man went on for 3 hours, but he went on undaunted. But at the end of the last few minutes of speaking to himself, he decided to stop. And then there was a man sitting right at the front row, and the professor went and shook his hand for him, thanking him and saying, please, thank you so much for being so polite and staying to the end. The man fidgeted, fumbled a little bit and said, Professor, I am actually from the media services, and I was waiting to collect the microphone you are using. So before my microphone is taken away, goodbye, good people. I love you all. I miss being with you. I miss the energy that was in the Department of Literature at the University of Nairobi. But we think of you, but grow. This elder says, grow, 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 spitting on the chest. Thank you. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Nishere Gidai Mugo. Thank you so much for your presentation. What a way to close the webinar today. It's been so profound. The presentation is precisely what we needed to mark 50 years of the existence of this department. Ladies and gentlemen, if you allow me, I have seen a number of questions that people have raised in the chats, but I'm also aware that we have overshot our time for about 30 minutes. So if the chair of the department allows me, Dr. Mishiri, I would propose that we purpose to bring the whole show to a close in the next 12 minutes so that people can actually go home and do what Professor Mugo has been saying. I want to say that two things. One is that the presentations today are recorded and they'll be available on YouTube and other channels for our access. And I also want to say that we've realized that we are still members of the same community of scholars, and that these discussions or debates or dialogues will not come to an end anytime soon. For that reason, I want to invite just about 1 or 2 questions that we can direct to any of our 4, or rather 3 speakers who gave us their show this evening. Professor Gidai Mugo's presentation on the politics of naming and the fact that reducing a whole genre to an adjective actually diminishes its contribution to our self-apprehension, to our self-understanding, and of course, it reduces our chances of affirming ourselves in a world of people who have always had reservations about our claims to humanity. I think that is a message that has sunk deep in all of us. For Professor Kitaka Umberia's presentation, I like the idea that self-publishing has actually contributed to the current terrain of what we're calling African literature. Were it not for self-publishing, perhaps we would not have witnessed the birth of the entire scope of what we call popular literature or urban literature in Africa. Using the examples of the examples of David Mailu, we all know what that kind of literature did for us in terms of compelling us to think about issues that had actually been left besides or left to the margins of what was supposed to be serious discourses. Professor Chisina, you are revisiting of Kenyan oral literature and the centrality of women, not just as consumers, but also as creators and producers of that literature, makes a critical reference to one of the strong points of the Department of Literature at the University of Nairobi. So thank you so much, colleagues, for honoring our invitation and for making this discussion what it is in terms of opening or pricing open some of those debates that we had either overlooked, ignored, or that were simply beyond the reach of our thoughts. I would like to invite just one or two questions, and then we can bring this to a close. If there's anyone who has a burning question, I would give one or two of us a chance. But in the event that we do not have somebody who is willing or burning to raise the question, I can just summarize.
I can see a hand up.
Yes.
I see Jane Bonya.
Yes. Jane. Okay, I don't know why I can't see it from this end, but thank you, Dr. Musonya, for drawing my attention to it. Let's allow Jen then to ask the question. And my plea to our colleague again is, please let's make it brief and direct it to the person who is best placed to answer the question. Thank you. Jen Bonya. Dr. Musonya, did you say she wanted to ask?
But I don't know where she's gone, but I've also seen somebody else, Kanda, with a raised hand.
Yes, Kanda had captured questions. Maybe
Thank
Kanda
you,
wants to
Shundu.
ask. Yes.
Yes, my question is specifically directed to Professor Chisina. Hello,
Yes, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. We are hearing what you're saying.
Yeah, so the professor alluded to some presentation by Brenda on the common fable between the hare and the hyena. And now the question is, in as much as we are trying to empower female characters in our pieces of literature, is it in essence downgrading patriarchy or trying to be equality? Because the kind of feminism that we know is one that tries to equate males, but when we try to empower women and in an essence playing the roles played by men, we are simply trying to jeopardize the society instead of creating an equal status. I think I formatted this question very well in one of the charts, which I believe you may have. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Kanda. The question, I think Professor Chisina has picked up your question. I also noticed in the chat that Dr. Rosa Opondo of Moi University had questions. I wonder if she wants to pose them to our speakers. Dr. Opondo, if you are there. And if Dr. Opondo is not there, I saw a question that had been raised by Robert Wesonga, which I believe that Professor Kitaka Umberia responded to towards the end of his presentation, unless Wesonga, you really want to pose the question yourself.
I still have to answer a question that was asked by Dr. Bongi.
Yes, Professor.
There are still two pending questions. Dr. Bongi was asking where we put the line between self-interest and objectivity. The answer to that is that we never, those of us who are in academia and who publish themselves, never publish academic works. If you look at Munge, the works that Wamitika publishes are creative works, and this is why I kept on referring to creative works. Otherwise, I mean, this curriculum vitae for those people publishing themselves, you can confirm that we never ever imagine of publishing anything academic. We just publish creative works in the same way that musicians produce their own music in music studios, in the same way that sculptors and painters show their work in studios. So there's absolutely no conflict of interest in terms of publishing. The second question was about, I mean, before I give that, I don't think those of us in the academia who publish themselves would ever also present their creative works for promotion. I can't imagine Professor Wamitila giving his copies of Arufia Mapera to panels for promotion. He will always go there with his academic papers published in journals. The second question is about quality. I hinted at that when I said that there's so much information on the internet today about publishing. So I would imagine any sole publisher author today knows that for you to publish a book that won't be worth, the paper is printed on, you will need to have your manuscript evaluated. You will need to have it edited thoroughly. You will need to have a competent typesetter. You will need to have a competent illustrator. You will need to have a competent printer. You will need to have use the right kind of paper. I mean, PIE, for instance, tells you can't, if you print a book on less than 70 grams per gram of 70 grams of paper, it can never get into the good system. If you have a children's book that is done with the pins at the intro, not joining, it can never go into the school system, because yes, indeed, will argue that that book will injure children. And so this is what I was hinting at when I said that there's so much information today, and this then goes into the quality of books. And indeed, one can do this experimentally. You can just go to textbook center, ask a book done by Marimba Publications or done by Vinimua, and then ask for a book published by Oxford or South African Publishers or Longhorn, and go and compare, the quality of production, because I guess what it was alluding to is the production. So I think the so-published authors have taken good care of have taken care of this issue of quality, and that's why I was saying that there's a lot of difference between the books published in the 70s and those that are being published today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Kitaka Umberia. I wonder if Professor Arunji Chisina has something to say regarding Kanda's question.
Yes, Dr. Siundu. Yes, Kanda, thank you so much for that question. I am privileged to teach first years at the University of Nairobi, and one of the things that I do is that I try to sensitize them, I try to humanize them, I try to make them to create harmony in their hearts and in their minds and in their systems, because I see literature as a genre, whether it is literature or orature, because I agree with Professor Michelle Githai Mogo, we should be calling it orature. Yeah, it should be, if it is worthy of the name, it should be a discipline that humanizes, a discipline that sensitizes, makes us more sensitive. It must be a discipline that makes us empathize. with others. And this would ultimately help build a human, not an ogre society. Now, there are two poems I use with the students. One is Michere Githae Mugo's poem entitled Wife of the Husband, where you find the husband is just snoring while the wife is just, slaving from dawn actually to dawn, because when she sleeps 4 hours to dawn, she's not asleep because she's thinking about tomorrow's burden. The other one is A Freedom Song by Marjorie Olute Magoe, where we find a child, a female child, Atieno, being oppressed in the name of she is my sister's daughter, and therefore she can slave, she doesn't even need to be paid and all that. What am I saying? What I'm saying is this: literature, whether it is written or orature, should subvert those systems, those practices, those attitudes that we have taken as normal in society, and try to educate our people, especially the young ones, that we need human societies, not human eat human societies. So this is what, in essence, I was saying in my presentation, and especially giving the role and position of women as one that needs to be humanized. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chisina. And thank you very much for all of us for our contribution towards making this event the success that it has been. I would like to take us to the end of this by inviting Professor Miriam Maranga Musonye to help us with the conclusion and the vote of thanks. Dr. Musonye, if you are in the room, the floor is yours, as we say.
Thank you very much, Dr. Siundu. Today you have decided I am professor, but that's good. It's a good prophecy. I'm greatly honored to be giving a vote of thanks after such a successful seminar. And really, I'm just at a loss for words or what to say, but I do appreciate this opportunity. I'd like, on behalf of the department, to thank most sincerely the university management, our DVC Academic Affairs, and our Dean, Faculty of Arts, Professor Ephraim Wahome, because of providing this opportunity for our distinguished literary scholars to come together under one digital roof to have this great conversation with us on how to create, on how creative literature shapes our individual, institutional, and national being. To our speakers of the day, it has been such a great, great day. And I found it especially enriching how your papers interlaced with each other, beginning with Professor Henry Ndangasi, who set the pace by telling us some backstories about the Department of Literature at University of Nairobi. And then Professor Arunji Chisina, who engaged our minds through Kenyan literature and through great poetry. It was great to listen to Professor Peter Muker, Professor Ivan Mwangi, who disturbed and unsettled our complacency about what we take for granted as Kenyan literature, and also our ideas on how literature operates within the global context. It was such a great opportunity to listen to Professor Kitaka Umberia, and he greatly demonstrated to us how a thriving literary culture is interlinked with the publishing industry. Professor Agora, your poem spoke volumes about your value for this department, and you demonstrated how the department has been an institution of enduring academic and intellectual influence. While Professor Michelle Mugo, you set the poetry and rhythm, the achievements of the Department of Literature at the University of Nairobi as a curriculum trailblazer, and you challenged us to move from oral literature to orature. For this and many more insights, I would like our honored speakers today to receive our most hearty gratitude. You have expanded our minds and helped us to appreciate the rich heritage of the Department of Literature at University of Nairobi. I would also like to render great appreciation to our moderator, Dr. Godwin Siwundu, for directing and the discussion and giving us very insightful comments. And also I recognize in a special way the chair of the Department of Literature, Dr. Jennifer Mushiri, for her great role as organizer and as host of this seminar. And in the same breath, I thank all my colleagues at the Department of Literature for being here, for participating in this seminar. And finally, my very, very warm gratitude goes to the audience. Without you, we would not have had this seminar. And indeed, your presence has made possible the promised conversations as per our theme. I'd like to say God bless you all, and may the conversations continue. Asanteni sana. Thank you. While I am with the mic, because Professor Michelle Mugo has taught me a thing or two, that while I have the mic, I can still 1 second. May I take this liberty, my boss, Dr. Mushiri, to say we unmute and clap for our presenters. We unmute and just clap. I think they deserve this. If we were together, we would have given them a unmute. This is to all of you, distinguished professors. Thank you, thank you. It has been a great, great honor. Wonderful to see all of you. Those I have seen before and those I haven't.
Well done. I'm glad to be here.
God bless you.
Great.
Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Godwin Siwundu.
Thank you very much, Dr. Musonye, for your conclusion and leading us to say thanks to our speakers. May I then invite the chair of the department, Dr. Mushiri, to officially close and end our seminar. Dr. Mushiri.
Thank you, Godwin. Since we've already, Miriam has already moved the vote of thanks, so I will not say again thank you, but truly I appreciate everybody who's been here today, our colleagues, our students, my teachers, their teachers, their teachers' teachers. I think it's a whole circle of people that's joined us this afternoon. Thank you very much. And like Miriam said, the conversation will continue. We could not exhaust it in 4 hours, we can see, but this is just the beginning of a series of conversations, and we shall continue having more in the coming months. So on behalf of the Department of Literature, thank you very much. Have a good evening or day, depending on where you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Siwundu, now does that mean we can go home? Yes, so the webinar is officially closed.
All right.
Yeah, because today it's just that I have